All right, let's hop right into these power rankings. You know how power rankings work. I'll give a quick rundown of a few things. First of all, I'm going to be giving my expectations of this team going into the season and kind of where they're at now. And for some of these bottom tier teams that are on the first couple tiers, which this will be ranked into a tier list as well, I'm also going to be discussing some things that's going to be crucial or important for them going into this offseason, what the team needs to do going forward. And then when it comes to some of the later teams, there's a couple that I'll mention off-season stuff, but for the most part, it's just going to be a discussion about those teams, where they're at now, what I expect for them going into the latter end of the season, into the playoffs and everything. The first team on the power ranking, or 32nd, depending on how you want to look at it, the last team, the worst team in the NFL right now, I have the New York Giants. Now, my expectation for the Giants going into this season wasn't very strong to begin with. It looks to me right now that they're obviously tanking, especially when they didn't start Drew Lock over Tommy DeVito. They just went more for sales. At this point now, I'm pretty sure Drew Lock is injured, and that's one of the reasons he's not playing. But regardless, the Giants are doing horribly. There was a lot of conversations about Saquon and them letting him go. Now, I don't think this conversation about letting Saquon go really starts this year. I think it starts more a few years ago when Daniel Jones was signed. Daniel Jones got that pretty big contract, and a lot of people were like, what's going on here? This isn't a very good idea. He's not a very good quarterback. Now, I've mentioned in a few different videos about my feelings on them letting Saquon go and making some jokes about how they took Daniel Jones over Saquon. But realistically looking at it, Saquon wouldn't be doing what he's doing on the Eagles if he was on the Giants. We knew that Saquon was an elite player, an elite running back, and here we are watching him behind probably one of the best offensive lines in the entire league on the Eagles, having a MVP caliber season at the running back position. Now, the thing that's important to realize here is he wouldn't really be doing this here on the Giants. Now, that's not to say that it was smart to let him go. It's just that they wouldn't have gotten nearly as much out of him as they would have hoped, and what he would be doing now with the Eagles. Now, with that being said, they are still in a really tough spot, having signed Daniel Jones a few years ago to the extended contract that he got, and we're at a point now where it's finally came to where I saw it going from the start, which is that he's not on the team anymore. He was playing a little practice squad safety for them as well. And the Giants are 32nd ranked in this power ranking. And even if you don't have the Giants ranked 32nd in your power ranking, or whoever else that does power rankings, it's pretty obvious that they suck and they're not very good. One of the other points about this team, just talking about the structure of it, the O-line's still really bad. The weapons are bad, other than Malik Neighbors, who's been a really bright spot on this team as long as the season started. He's been their number one target when they do have him as a number one target, and he's been really dangerous when they do lean into him, and they haven't leaned into him as much as I'd like to this season. He's had his own thoughts and opinions on that in press conferences and whatnot. But, as negative as I feel about the offense, I think, this defense is doing some good stuff, and there's a lot of good pieces on this defense, especially when you look at the rookie class that they have. They have one of the best rookie classes overall from first round to seventh round out of anyone, including like Elijah Chapman, who I don't even think was drafted. I'm pretty sure he was undrafted, but Elijah Chapman getting in the mix there, Drew Phillips, Tyler Nubin, those guys have been really good rookies and have made this defense at least, rosterable and worth watching. And then obviously they had the acquisition of Brian Burns in the offseason as well. He's been good, and Kayvon Thibodeau's been good too. They suffered from the injury with Dexter Lawrence, pretty hardcore, but his defense has a lot of really nice pieces that I'd say going into next season will be very important for them. Moving on to some of the things about the Giants that I think are going to be necessary for the offseason moves. Another big conversation around the Giants is, what do you do with Brian Daboll, right? This was a guy that they were pretty excited to get. He started off his career pretty hot, going to the playoffs and with Daniel Jones and everything, and making Daniel Jones look really good, and now they're considering firing him. And I've been a big supporter of Brian Daboll for as long as he's been on the Giants. I think he's a really good coach, and I still do, but it's hard to just not acknowledge how bad the Giants are. Now, I've made a lot of points in the past in something I firmly believe, which is that one of the most important assets to a coach or to a team is a coaching staff and a head coach. You look at teams like the Vikings, and I'll be talking more about them later, not just when I get to the Vikings, but just in general. A coaching staff and a coach is really important for team success, but it's tough to make that point with a team like the Giants when I'm sitting here saying that Brian Daboll is a really good coach, and then they're also the 32nd ranked team in the league. So, what do you do with Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen? I personally think you give him this year. I personally think, let Daboll get his quarterback, whoever that is. He walked into Daniel Jones, didn't get to pick him, and that's just what he's had to deal with. And now, hopefully, with a defense that has its stuff together, D-line, cornerback room. I mean, there's some issues in the cornerback room, to get me wrong, but it's a lot of young talent that has a lot of high hopes, including what's his name? What's the corner that they drafted a couple years ago? I can't remember off the top of my head, but the corner they drafted a couple years ago I was really high on, and he hasn't been doing well this season. I still believe in him, though. Now, with the offense, it really is just going to come down to getting yourself a quarterback for Brian Daboll to bring up. And it's going to have to be someone that you think can make an impact in year one, because Brian Daboll is only going to have this next season. If he does get it, we still don't know if they're going to fire him at the end of the season or anything. But if they let him finish the season, go into the offseason with him, let him draft a quarterback, it's as soon as the owners want to press that red button and let him go because they're 2-4 at the start of next season, they're going to press that button. So it's going to have to be someone you're sure on. Could that be Cam Ward? Could that be Shedeur Sanders? I don't know. It very well could be. Regardless, this team's going to need a quarterback. Something else I think would be interesting that could be a really big benefit to this team. I know this is someone that not a lot of people like right now or see as a good coach, but I still think Matt Eberflus is a really good defensive mind and coordinator. He did a lot of good stuff in Chicago on the defensive side of things. He's probably not a head coach, probably not a guy that has that caliber or esteem to be a head coach. Maybe in a few years, I don't know. He had a lot of issues as a head coach in Chicago, but that doesn't change the fact that he's a really good defensive mind. So I think it would be interesting if Matt Eberflus went to the New York Giants and just worked there as a defensive coordinator for them, and keep Brian Daboll as the offensive guy. Let him focus on that. Let Eberflus focus on the defense. That would be fantastic for them, I believe. Other things that they're going to have to focus on is they need a really big offseason. Like I said, this is the last year for Brian Daboll, likely, and they're going to have to go balls to the wall, making sure this roster is polished, and that what I've been preaching and what I believe he believes within himself is that he's a really good coach, and he can get the job done as long as the roster works. That's going to start with an O-line, because the offensive line still isn't very good. Might be good to bring in an O-line coach that really knows what they're doing. But more than that, it's probably important to bring in some real names and players on the offensive line. And, you look at a guy like Evan Neal, who they drafted a few years ago, a highly touted draft pick. A lot of people thought he was going to be amazing. He hasn't really worked out. Now, this season, he's gotten a lot better. I think so. But not enough that I'm not going to find someone to replace him, if that makes sense. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of really nice young pieces in this cornerback room, but they still really are going to have to fill that out. And, I think a veteran presence would be awesome in there. Someone that is still like a Stephon Gilmore type, maybe not him necessarily, but someone that's established and good and doesn't have to be your one necessarily, but can bring some more experience into the room. I did mention earlier how, important quarterback was going to be for them and brought up Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I don't necessarily think this is a team that has to draft a quarterback. I could see them, especially since I was mentioning that this is the it year for Dable, I could see them getting someone like Sam Darnold in free agency if the Vikings don't sign him back. Someone that's, a bridge quarterback isn't even the right term for Sam Darnold, but someone of that caliber that you already know is a good quarterback. You already know has proved what they can do, instead of a rookie that's going to take a little bit of time to develop. So I don't necessarily think that the Giants have to go quarterback in the draft. I do think they have to get a quarterback, whether that's free agency or trade or whatever. Not Aaron Rodgers, though. Please, not Aaron Rodgers. I guess we'll just keep him in New York. But definitely need to get a quarterback, because I also think it would be awesome if they got someone like Travis Hunter in the draft. I'll probably have a reason to bring this up later, and this is a little bit irrelevant to the Giants necessarily, but I think a lot of questions are asked about what is Travis Hunter going to play in the NFL. To me, I think you play him at cornerback and mix him in a little bit at receiver. But one thing that's important to realize is you can't have someone be a receiver and mix them in at cornerback on the defense. That's not really how that works for defensive players. It's not the same. Like, you look at like the Patriots when they were mixing Marcus Jones in on offense a little bit. They mixed him in on offense, but he wasn't starting at receiver. He was a cornerback that they mixed in at receiver. That's something you can do. I don't think you can do that the same way inverse, even if it is someone that's talented like Travis Hunter. That's also because that's kind of, you're messing with the flow of the defense. You can't really plug players in and out the same way at cornerback like that. So I think it would be best if you start him at cornerback and mix him in at receiver a little bit. But regardless, even if he isn't getting a whole lot of receiver reps, you're going to get a few explosive plays out of him. That is if the Giants do draft him and also hopefully get a quarterback at some point in time. On to my second team in this power ranking, I'm going to make it the Las Vegas Raiders. Going into this season, I had higher expectations for them than two. I didn't think they were necessarily going to make the playoffs or be a super dangerous team by any means, but I wasn't expecting this entirely. For starters, Antonio Pierce. We're going to have that conversation about him, because not every coach is Dan Campbell, and it might be kind of time to give up on him. I really liked him going into the season, and it kind of sucks to say that, but I don't think this is the guy that's going to get the Raiders to where they need to go. And I also doubt this is the kind of team that's going to want to keep him around and see how it goes. I feel like they're ready to move on after this season as it is. But he's not the only person to blame for this. The quarterback play hasn't been very good, which kind of brings me to someone else that I believed in more than I should have based off of their resume, which is Gardner Minshew. Look, I was never saying Gardner Minshew was going to be a top 15 quarterback and turn the Raiders around. But what we've been seeing Sam Darnold do with the Vikings, I thought could have been semi-similar with the Raiders. The only difference is the Raiders don't have the roster talent around to elevate Gardner Minshew that much, but he's had a lot of really solid play in his career, and he's a really good culture and locker room guy, and I just really like Gardner Minshew as a person and who he projects himself to be online. He's fun, obviously, but moving forward, I don't see a reality where their starting quarterback is going to be Gardner Minshew. Now, I think someone that could be a little bit more interesting is Aiden O'Connell. Aiden O'Connell is older, not older than Minshew, but he's older for a second-year quarterback. I think he's like 25 right now or something. But yeah, he hasn't been playing like some backup scrub necessarily. You look at his body of work that he's had on the Raiders, I don't think you feel incredibly negative about them going into the season with Aiden O'Connell next year. Regardless, I think it's probably going to be in the Raiders' best interest to acquire a new quarterback if they want to start something new. Now on to, another quarterback in this room for the Raiders that I do have a little bit of interest in as far as the future goes, which is Aiden O'Connell. Now, I talked about Gardner Minshew probably not being the guy. I think Aiden O'Connell's body of work and his film and everything show that there's a good shot this guy could be on the Raiders next season and play for them and be solid. Here's the thing. Here's my opinion on the Raiders and what they should be doing moving forward. First of all, you have to realize that they've suffered a lot of injuries this season and had a lot of off-field issues or sideline issues with Antonio Pierce and everything. Aiden O'Connell hasn't been a complete disaster when he's on the field. He's a solid quarterback, probably a backup level guy. I get it. My opinion on the Raiders, though, is that they should probably consider building this thing from the ground up. Now, I was just talking about the Giants and what they need to do in the offseason. I don't really see them the same way as the Raiders. I think the Raiders kind of need to hit the kill switch on what they have going on right now. There are some good pieces on this team, but it's not enough to make me think that, you have to keep everything going and just build off of what you have. I'd consider shopping Max Crosby. Max Crosby's a fantastic player, and, he does a lot for this team when he's healthy. He's usually pretty healthy, but this season he's been hurt. There's so many holes on this team, so many holes on this roster, and with the injuries, it's obviously made it a little bit tougher, the injuries they've dealt with, to see what the real holes and issues on this team are, but either way, there's a lot that needs to be done this offseason. I don't think I'm in line for them to just take Shador or Cam Ward in the first, couple picks that they have. There's so many issues. You look at the right side of that offensive line, it's horrible. The offensive line has a lot of issues. And then the receiving core, especially with losing Devontae Adams, it's Jacoby Meyer and, a little bit of Trey Tucker here. Now, someone that is an absolute stud and is a positive for this team is Brock Bowers. Obviously, I think you keep him. You don't want to let him go by any means. Brock Bowers is amazing. Other than that, and a few of the other pieces they have, Jackson Powers-Johnson and Nate Hobbs, maybe. I mean, I'd even consider him because he's not, an elite cornerback or anything. There's a couple guys on this team, on this roster, that I would keep around, but I'd really consider hitting the reset button for the Raiders. And I also think this is another team that if you aren't going to start Aiden O'Connell next season, it might be in their best interest, based off everything I just said, to get a bridge quarterback like an Aiden O'Connell or something, instead of using a bridge quarterback like Sam Darnold or something. Instead of just using that first pick you have to get a quarterback that's going to kind of flounder around on this roster that isn't built very well. Moving on to the offseason needs for this team. As I mentioned, this isn't necessarily a draft quarterback team. I'd be a bigger fan even if it was Kirk Cousins or something like that, or if it was just sticking with Aiden O'Connell, who I'm kind of talking up a lot here because I don't think he's the reason they're losing games. Maybe he's not winning them very many games, but it's difficult to find quarterbacks that are going to elevate your squad and win you a bunch of football games. Aiden O'Connell might not be that, but where are you going to find that right now? Are you going to trust that whatever rookie you take is going to do that immediately? That's tough to believe, especially in a class that isn't as good as we've seen in the past. And I did talk a little bit of crap on the offensive line, but this offensive line does have pieces. You have Jackson Powers-Johnson, Colton Miller's a solid left tackle, Andre James at center is good. It's, like I said, the right side that's really struggling and has a lot of issues, so it's going to be important that they fill out that offensive line entirely, because offensive line is one of those positional groups that you can have 3-4 really good offensive linemen, and then if you have one lame duck, which they do have one lame duck, it kind of screws the whole thing up. And they have two lame ducks at right tackle and right guard, so they're going to want to bring in at least some serviceable players at those positions to kind of ensure that that's not going to be a struggle anymore. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about offensive lines in these beginning tiers and rows. It's difficult to build a really well-made offensive line in the NFL. There's just, there's 5 positions that you need, so it's more than finding one good quarterback or one good running back or receiver or whatever. Receiver, you ideally have 3 solid guys, but it's a little tougher with offensive line. But that's going to be important for them moving forward, especially if maybe not this upcoming draft, but next year's draft, they do get a quarterback, I think the offensive line is going to need to be established. So that's something I think they should really focus on in this offseason. They do need at least one more weapon. Let's say they keep Jacoby Meyer and Brock Bowers, clearly. Michael Mayer's a good addition as well as a backup tight end, but you're going to want at least one more receiver. And then, hey, you do have 2 solid tight ends, so you don't have to play in heavy receiver personnel or anything. You can play with 2 tight ends on the field. That's fine, especially because Brock Bowers goes out in the slot and moves around a whole lot. They are going to need another receiver of some caliber. It could be someone that's kind of on a similar skill set of Jacoby Meyer or whatever. In my Raiders rebuild that I did on my Madden, I traded for Christian Watson, which was pretty cool. So they could consider that. And we know how correlative Madden is to the real life NFL. And the other thing that I do think is important to realize for the Raiders is that a lot of the issues that they had this season was injuries. So going into next season, you get Christian Wilkins back. This defense is probably going to be pretty solid. Max Crosby coming back as well. Malcolm Kuntz. They're still going to need another interior defensive tackle of some kind, and I think someone else to fill out the cornerback room is going to be necessary. But yeah, I think that, really what I want to see from the Raiders is making big sweeping changes, because this is a team that's been down in the dumps for a while now, and a lot of these early teams have that kind of similar sentiment. These early teams that I'm talking about, they're not very good and haven't been very good for a while. But the Raiders, I don't see enough pieces to just move forward with what you have. I'd like to see big sweeping changes going into this next season. Moving on to the third team I have in this bottom tier, the Tennessee Titans. Now, I actually wrote up my thoughts and bullets for the Titans a few days ago, and since then, they announced that they benched Will Levis for Mason Rudolph. The first thing I have in my notes is Will Levis has been a roller coaster. The second thing I have is consider moving on from Will Levis. Yeah, I agree with the Titans with the benching, especially the fact that they have a new coach. Now, I am typically on the side of the young quarterback or young player of any position, and saying that they don't need to start right away and they need time to develop and all this. Will Levis has a lot of struggles with his game that I don't think are going to go away. The things that I mentioned about giving players time to develop and being patient doesn't work for everyone, and I think Will Levis is one of those guys, especially when you look at his age. This isn't a 21-year-old Anthony Richardson, 22 now, that we're talking about. He's 24, and while he hasn't had an incredibly long resume coming from college to the NFL in terms of games played, I see a lot of his issues as being things you aren't necessarily going to correct. A lot of the mental mistakes he makes, just where you need him to get to in terms of being a quality starting quarterback that takes care of the football, there's just such a huge divide between that and where he's at now. He has some of the worst pocket presence of any quarterback in the league. The amount of times he will either run out of a clean pocket or just run nowhere when he sees pressure, or make a lot of those stupid Will Levis plays we've been seeing this season where he's throwing pick sixes, trying to throw it while he's sideways, he's parallel to the ground and just throwing it up to a defensive tackle trying to get the ball out or whatever. That stuff is kind of tough to clean up. Not to mention the fact that the other traits he has, he has a big arm, but you look at some of the other things like his accuracy and his processing. I just talked about his decision making. A lot of those things just aren't very good, and it's tough to clean all of them up. Now, he is a solid athlete with a big arm. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't start him at all and get a new quarterback and plan to move on from him if he does get traded somewhere else or whatever and sits as a backup and maybe gets a little bit of a role. But I put that they should consider moving on from Will Levis in my notes, and they put Mason Rudolph in a day or two later, which I believe to be the right move. I mean, again, we are looking at a first-year head coach for the Titans that's trying to keep and secure his job. So from his perspective, it makes sense to get someone in that can hopefully get a couple wins and just, not make the coach himself look like a total idiot for trying to be the head coach of this team. Moving on from that, though, let's get to some of the other positional groups on this team. Calvin Ridley, look, they gave him receiver 1 money. He's had a lot of really good moments this season. He wasn't worth the money. He hasn't lived up to the hype, really. I like Ridley a lot, but you look at the contract he got, and it doesn't add up to how he's been playing. Now, you can blame Will Levis for that and the offensive line and all that, but we're talking about someone that got, top-tier money. You're supposed to be able to elevate over those things, and he hasn't. So that's been a huge bummer. The other thing is, like I said, for a lot of these early teams in this power ranking, the O-line has been absolutely horrible. I think this is going to be one of their top priorities going into the offseason. Injuries have been relevant in how poor the offensive line has been doing, Lloyd Cushenberry getting hurt. But that doesn't excuse Nicholas Petit-Frere still being on the field, because I promise you, literally any other right tackle that you can find, whether it's on your practice squad, it's the third or second string, or whoever on your team, someone you can find in free agency, whoever it is, they're going to be better than him at playing right tackle. He is probably the worst tackle in the entire league. Treylon Burks hasn't really developed how you'd want either. They haven't found a good use for him. That whole thing has just turned into a complete shame, from trading A.J. Brown to the Eagles, watching what he's become as a receiver, literally a top 2, top 3 receiver in the league. He might be the best right now. And then you bring in Treylon Burks he just hasn't been able to develop, and you haven't been able to find that sweet spot with him on the team. Treylon Burks is someone that has a lot of talent, has a lot of potential, good athlete and everything. It's a real shame that they haven't found a way to get him going at all. And I think one of the main things, we're kind of I'm getting him ahead of myself into the offseason moves here, which might be a good time to do that. But this ownership and the management, general management, the team building aspect of the Titans, it's been bad. This is one of the worst run teams in the entire league. Their draft history is terrible. Their trade history is horrible also. And I was watching, I can't remember the name of who I was watching at this very second, but they were talking about how teams will, it was the Bootleg podcast, I just remembered, with Brett Coleman. They were talking about how a lot of these bad teams won't pay and won't re-sign players that they do hit on, whether it's in the draft or free agency. They will hit on someone and then not want to pay them because, it's just not right. They don't have the money, they don't have the cap space, they have other needs or whatever. And then that ends up being a big problem for them down the road or that season. And the Titans are one of the worst at that. They'll have any quality or good player that's on their team, they will find a way for them to not be on their team anymore and to trade them or release them or whatever. And, one of the guys they haven't done that with is Jeffrey Simmons. But, man, the Titans are so quick to move on from people, just like they did with Ernest Brown. Sending him to the Seahawks. Not that he was playing amazing football on the Titans or anything, but you look at him on the Seahawks now, he's playing really good football. And they just can't seem to learn from their mistakes whatsoever. So, in my opinion, the number one thing that's going to help the Titans is getting completely new ownership, new GM work, focusing on being able to draft and sign appropriate players and bring in actual acquisitions that will make the team prosper, because that's something that they're horrible at. In terms of Brian Callen, I feel like it's pretty obvious that you have to give him another year based off of all the issues that he's had to deal with and how the roster has looked. No, he hasn't gotten it done this year, but how many times can you just move on to a new coach? Not that the Jets have done that, or the Titans have done that. They've had Mike Vrabel for a very long time, which, by the way, if they just kept him, they'd be in a much better situation right now if they had Mike Vrabel. But it's not that they've moved on from coach to coach to coach. We just see that elsewhere in the league. I think you have to give Callahan another year. He's done some good stuff. I've seen some, some good fire out of him that's been implemented into the right spots. I've seen some good play design as well. You have to give him another year here, in my opinion, with, like I was mentioning with Dable, give him his quarterback, whoever he wants, might be a free agency guy. I do think this is a team that could go to the draft, though, and look for a quarterback. Some of the other bright spots that this team has had is T'Vondre Sweat, who they snagged later in the draft than he should have been, has been a dog. He's played really well, and that's no surprise. I mean, this is someone I was seeing, going in the first round, and then he gets into some trouble, and teams have some concerns with him and his off-field stuff. Titans take a risk on him, and this was a hit for them. I just talked a lot about, how bad the management and team building, how bad the Titans are at that, and they did land T'Vondre Sweat, which is great. They overall had, as bad as the draft history as I was talking about, this draft wasn't horrible. I had a lot of questions about the J.C. Latham pick, and that hasn't proven me wrong at all, but you also get Jarvis Brownlee, who was a hit. That's a big addition to this cornerback room, which, moving on to what this team needs to do in the offseason, I think that's kind of an important aspect. This team needs a lot of work. This defense needs a lot of work. I think you keep the cornerback room as it is. L'Jarius Sneed hasn't really lived up to the hype, but again, a spot where you're dealing with a lot of injuries, and L'Jarius Sneed, Brownlee, a few of those other guys that they have on the team, I think that's going to be a really solid combination of cornerbacks to kind of fill out that room. Regardless of the cornerback room being solid, there's other spots that need addressed. Linebacker is one of them for sure. On the defense, they also had some injuries there that they're going to have to, or not have to, but it's going to be nice for those guys to come back next season, like Jack Gibbons. Kenneth Murray it's just not a good linebacker. Let's just move on from that. He's not good. Then you look at their edge room, which is kind of whatever. I don't mind Harold Landry a whole lot, but they do really want and need to get a number one guy, or at least someone that can add just a lot more to this edge room and provide some pressure on the quarterback through pass rushing. So that's going to be huge for them. And then, like I mentioned at the start of the Titans talk, this offensive line is bad. And if they do nothing this year, they have to replace Nicholas Petit-Frere. That's going to be one of their main priorities, I think. And then, obviously, with a team like this that's ranked third or fourth or whatever, more issues. Quarterback, like I mentioned, that's something I think you could draft. If you don't want to draft, then there's going to be a few free agency quarterbacks to go after and then look for next season. And then you need another weapon for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they look for a really solid tight end this year, because first of all, in the draft, there's a few tight ends coming out of college that I like and are pretty good. And Chigo Okonkwo's a good tight end, but he's not like a traditional, well-rounded tight end. He's a really good athlete that plays tight end. They could be leaning into him a lot more on offense, but I think this team would benefit a lot from having like a real 6'6", 250-pound, solid hand, good enough route runner, kind of tight end, someone like I don't know. Not that they could acquire this guy, but if you got someone kind of like Dalton Schultz, maybe they could get Dalton Schultz. I don't know, but Dalton Schultz doesn't fit the exact description as what I just described, but that's someone that just kind of came to mind as maybe that is a possible acquisition for them, and he would fit this team well and add something that I think they need. And obviously they need a receiver as well, so that is going to be it for the Titans. Moving on to the next team that is still in this tier, but I do think has a little bit more hope than the last few teams I talked about. That's the Patriots, with Drake May becoming the guy. He hasn't been playing absolutely outstanding football, but for a rookie that started, midway towards the season, he's looked pretty good. He's had a lot of really good moments. He showed why he was taken where he was, what his upside and ability is. I think he showed that they for sure made the right decision with taking him. Now, that's not to say that there aren't issues on the rest of this team. And they're issues where they have always been issues. The offensive line is really bad. That's something they're going to have to fix. I will say with Drake May and his play style, obviously you want to get a good offensive line in the room or in the building. I think I'd honestly put a little bit more of a priority on the receiving core, though, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Drake May is really good at running around and facing pressure. That's something he was good at coming out of college, was making plays on the run and while being chased down. The other thing, though, is as bad as this offensive line is, I think the receiving core is probably even worse. They really just have no one to get the ball to. I like Demario Douglas, but he's like a 3, and then don't even talk to me about anyone else. I mean, this receiving core is bad. It's as bad as it can get in the NFL realistically, and it just happens to be on the Patriots. So that's something that they're definitely going to have to address. When it comes to the head coach, Gerard Mayo, this is someone I would personally like to see get another year. One of the big things with Gerard Mayo going into this season is that he was a defensive guy who was supposed to carry the legacy of Bill Belichick's defense with him, and he hasn't done that this season, really. This defense hasn't been good at all, but there's a few things you have to remember. They've dealt with a lot of crucial injuries this season. One that really comes to mind is Christian Barmore getting hurt early in the year was a huge loss. Now, he's come back, and he's played okay, but you could tell he was coming off an injury and wasn't fully there. And other than that, them trading away Matthew Judon hasn't really worked out very well for them. They don't have a super solid replacement for him. Keon White hasn't really been the dude. Davin Godshaw's been injured as well on this defensive line. Really, on defense, the one person that's been leading the charge and making it not a complete train wreck is Christian Gonzalez, who they absolutely hit on with that draft pick from last season. So it's really nice seeing Christian Gonzalez play up to the level he is playing at. But there's still a lot of issues on this defense. Now, I do think some of that could be directed to Gerard Mayo for sure. But like I said, I think it's important to remember and realize there's been some injuries, and there were a couple trades that I didn't really like because they just kind of shipped off some of their defensive talent for not a whole lot, not much reason either. And that's obviously been tough for Gerard Mayo to deal with. Now, the other thing about Gerard Mayo is, I know this is a no-patience league. We want to win. We got to win now. I think this is the kind of guy, this is the kind of coach that can figure it out and get it done if you give him another year. So I want to see Gerard Mayo around for another year. I doubt that's going to happen. I will say, though, if they can get a guy like Mike Vrabel to be the head coach, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. If they can get a huge upgrade over Vrabel, I'm all for it, or over Gerard Mayo. But if your upgrade is just going to be like Matt Eberflus or something, don't even bother with that. Don't bother with someone that's about on Gerard Mayo's level anyway. I'd want to give him another season. And then I'd also want to get an offensive coordinator in the coaching room that can really help the development of Drake May and develop a really nice offensive system. With how bad the offensive line is, it's going to take a little bit of time to get that group going, and there's a lot of ways to work around a bad offensive line. I think they need to lean into that a lot more, and especially having a quarterback like Drake May, who is mobile and athletic, move him around more into boot and just a lot more play action where he's getting outside the pocket, making throws that way, instead of just dropping him back as much. So getting a good offensive mind in the building that can address some of those things that even if you can't fully attack the offensive line position this offseason, if it's only like 5% better or whatever, they get another guard in there or something. If that's the case, get someone in that can address that and help with that, with having a poor offensive line. You look at teams like the Ravens, like their offensive line is seen as elite and one of the best in the league. You look more specifically at the pieces that they have on the offensive line. Roger Rosengarten, an undersized rookie. Daniel Falele, an oversized second or third year player or whatever that gets beat quite a bit and can't really do a whole lot against in pass protection against a faster, athletic pass rusher. That's where he really struggles. They work around the issues that they have on the offensive line by obviously you have someone that's way more athletic than Drake May, but moving Lamar around and getting him into play action boot and a lot of stuff like that. So I think offensively, that's one thing that they're going to have to focus on. The Patriots as a whole. And then, as I mentioned, the offensive line and receiving core has been bad. The receiving core is one of the most devastating to me. So I do think this is one of those teams that if they did get Travis Hunter or something, I'd consider keeping him at receiver and then mixing him around a little bit. I wouldn't even mix him at cornerback because, like I said, I don't like that. But he's a good enough receiver that if they ended up getting him, I think he can make a really big difference on this team. But regardless, there's plenty of other ways to get a quality receiver. I mean, this has already been talked about a lot that I've seen online, but T. Higgins is someone that's, the Patriots are really after. There's other receivers in the draft. There's tons of ways to fix this receiving core and get it better. But where they've been going, what they've been doing hasn't been working. And you don't have the same structure and same team to rely on smaller, white receivers drafted in the 6th, 7th round to pick up the slack. This is a completely new regime, completely new team. No Tom Brady. You need a real receiving core, and I'd really like to see them go big on a receiving core this year. I think Drake May's biggest need for his development and for him to be good is a receiving core, not as much the offensive line, but that is still a huge issue. Now, on to the defense, like I did mention, a lot of injuries, a lot of issues there. I think next season we're going to see the Patriots come back and their defense is going to be at least back to average. It hasn't even really been average this season. I think they could be kind of in that 16th to 18th range at the start of next season if they keep the talent they have now, get some guys back healthy, fill in a couple spots. That defense is going to be fine. One other thing I did want to note is I wasn't a fan of the Patriots drafting Jalen Polk, and now it's tough saying this about a rookie because, like I said, I'm all for young players. I'm usually on their side of things. I'm not going to call him a bust, but that was a really bad pick that they made. This is a receiver coming out of Washington that just wasn't special at anything. He wasn't elite in any category. He had fine speed. He had fine hands. His route running was just okay. Like, there wasn't anything spectacular about him. I mean, I guess the best trait of him is having a nice frame and being able to win some tougher catches over the middle and stuff like that. But we haven't seen that from him this season regardless. I didn't understand that pick, especially when there were a lot of other receivers ahead of him that I would have way preferred, like Adonai Mitchell. And I don't know if I remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure Ladd McConkey was on the board there at the time. Can't be certain about that, but even if it's not those two guys, there were a few others I would have preferred. Like Jalen McMillan, honestly, would have been a better pick, borderline. But yeah, that was a huge miss for me, was them getting Jalen Polk. And then up to some of the things that I think is important for the offseason. I guess I already kind of addressed them, but they definitely, please draft a wide receiver 1 or get a wide receiver 1 in free agency. It's a huge need for this team. Get another big name pass rusher on the edge. That's going to be one of their other top priorities when it comes to the defensive side of things. Honestly, you get a number 1 pass rusher at like outside linebacker for them, because that's the system they play. At edge, if you get a number 1 edge or something, this defense is like kind of right back in shape, especially with some of those guys coming back from injury. So that's going to be big for them. And then something I would love to see is if you get another number 2 corner that you can match up with Christian Gonzalez and also with Marcus Jones playing in the slot a good bit. That cornerback room is going to be filled out too. So this team isn't as far off as people think, especially from the defensive side of things. On offense, it's a lot of offensive line, it's a lot of receiver, but it's safe to say that they did get one of the more important aspects of this, which is the quarterback. I think Drake May is awesome, is going to continue to be awesome. Next up, staying in this same tier, one step above the Patriots, though, and everyone else we've talked about. Yes, this is in succession, so teams that I first started talking about were 32, and then it went 31, 30, 29, 28. Not sure where we're at with the Browns necessarily. I think this is 27. But, the Cleveland Browns, this team the fan base has really been through it. My expectations going into the season was not necessarily what the record is currently showing. But here's what I will say about the Browns. And this is I've talked about this too much, and I know everyone else has. But the Deshaun Watson side of this, yes, it's probably the worst trade of all time, worst acquisition and everything. One other thing I want to note to that is we'll see how it plays out. You never know what happens in the NFL. But I will make the statement and the take that I fully believe Deshaun Watson played his last snap of professional football this season, unless the Jets want to sign him for some reason. That's kind of the only other team I could see like bringing in a quarterback like Deshaun Watson for a stupid contract is the Jets. But yeah, Deshaun Watson's he played such bad football going at the start of the season before he got injured, and I think this conversation about him, people are like, try to just talk about the player and not the person, blah blah blah. Well, first of all, I will say the person, gross, absolutely gross. I'm ashamed that he's still in the league. And if I am going to completely ignore all that other stuff, I still think he is not in the top 32 of quarterbacks in this league. Take away everything that's happened off field, take away the stupid contract and the fully guaranteed money and the amount of times he's been injured. Just when he is on the field, I do not believe he is a top 32 quarterback in the league. He has currently has some of the worst processing, and I'm going to say currently because the Deshaun Watson of the Texans was not the same football player. As of right now, he has horrible processing. He has horrible decision-making. His accuracy is gone. He's still a decent athlete, but he's not as good of an athlete as he was. He's really bringing nothing to the Browns or any team that he would potentially go to. And seeing what's happened with him and the Browns in general missing off on a nice playoff run by having him last season and how it's gone now with them having such a horrible record, it's like, what more could you have asked for? Like, this is exactly what the Browns asked for by making such a stupid decision by giving him that contract and bringing him in. It's like they want these teams that sell their souls, like the Jets and the Browns, like sell their souls to a single player, expecting a full turnaround. Like, I can't think of a whole lot of times we've seen that and it work out very well. And this is just another one of those stories. So I want to move on from the Deshaun Watson discussion because there's a lot of other things that are important to talk about with the Browns. First of all, Jameis Winston, probably my favorite player in the league, honestly. I love Jameis Winston to death. As of right now, they have benched him for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. As much as it was fun watching Jameis Winston watching him do his thing, I don't think this is necessarily the wrong thing for them to do for a couple of reasons. Jameis Winston is still playing Jameis Winston football, and we all know what that looks like. As fun as it is, and as many big plays as he makes, there's all the bad plays that come with it, and all the plays that really set the team back. And no coach and GM wants to have to deal with that long term. Getting him in for a few games can be nice, because he can have one of those games where he doesn't throw a whole bunch of interceptions and just kind of takes care of the football and dumps it off a bit. Or, if you have a longer strand of games and longer sample size to look at, like we've had, there's going to be that Broncos game, which, by the way, making that game a complete shootout, keeping it kind of close, that's Jameis Winston. That's perfectly normal Jameis Winston football. It was fun, but, a coach like Kevin Stefanski isn't going to put up with that very long, so the other thing about starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson over Jameis Winston is I still think Dorian Thompson-Robinson has a nice little developmental window here. And I think he has a lot to prove in showing that he could be a quarterback for the Browns. So it makes some sense to me that you would let him start within the last few weeks of the season, or at least this next game, and see how he does. And yeah, it could. This is a guy that was coming out of the draft that was one of those, on a lot of people's boards as an underrated draft prospect, underrated quarterback prospect that the Browns picked up, and I could see him doing some fun stuff. I don't think it's gonna be, I don't think he's gonna prove that he should be the starter for the rest of his career necessarily for the Browns. He could, I don't know, but this is a smart move in my opinion by the Browns to at least at some point during this season give Dorian Thompson-Robinson some reps at quarterback and see what you got with him more than you did last season. Getting another year under his belt is big. So that's how I feel about the quarterback room. I'll move back to the offense in a second, but I do want to mention the defense. It has some issues, but you still got a really good pass rush. It hasn't showed up the same as it did last year, but you still have a really good pass rush. That cornerback room's pretty filled out. Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. Martin Emerson's still playing good football. And Grant Delpit at safety and everything. So they've been dealing with some injuries. But this defense doesn't need drastic changes. In fact, I would say I would ignore a good chunk of this defense unless you can pick up some cheap talent that can fill out major weak spots and spots where there were injuries. Unless you do that, I would ignore a lot of what you do on defense this offseason and focus on getting that quarterback in the building. And then the other thing, like I said, go back to the offense. This offensive line is really bad, and that's going to be within the next few years. They're going to have to totally revamp the offensive line because the players they have there that are good are either getting injured a lot or are old. And this tackle duo, or the tackle positions for the Browns, really fell short this season. Jedrick Wills, who's been dealing with some injuries himself, is not the guy. I don't think this is someone that doesn't deserve to be on a team. In fact, I think if he went somewhere like the Patriots or whatever, he could really help them out. But I don't think they're going to sign him to a long-term contract or anything. He's done some good stuff in his career, but not enough to really earn a second contract. And then the rest of the offensive line just has a ton of issues. They've been beat up this season, but like I said, age is catching up, and this is going to be something that they're going to have to address this year pretty heavily in the offseason, whether it's through draft or free agency. The other thing that is cool and very nice is Jerry Jeudy's kind of broken out a good bit here on the Browns. That was a really solid move from them to get him. I didn't see the vision to begin with, and the vision still isn't fully there because, at the time they had Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore, and it's just you have three guys that do relatively similar things. It's all three are they're like Pokemon, where it's Elijah Moore, his evolution is Jerry Jeudy, and then Jerry Judy's evolution is Amari Cooper. So that was kind of odd to me, but you only have, two of those three guys now. So, they're going to get Cedric Tillman in the mix a little bit more. Still have David Njoku. So this team has a lot of pieces. The main thing that is missing from the Browns is a quarterback, and that offensive line is going to come next. I will say I have some questions about Kevin Stefanski. This is a guy that won Coach of the Year last season, and I don't know if you get rid of him this offseason and look for a new coach, maybe, but I've never been super high on Kevin Stefanski. I'm not sold on him as the long term, and I think that if you did have the coach that Kevin Stefanski has talked about, Coach of the Year kind of caliber guy, I think this team has a much better record this season despite all their issues. So I'm not sold on Kevin Stefanski. I'd like to hear from Browns fans how they feel about that. But yeah, those are, a lot of the needs and kind of how the Browns have done this season. Moving on to the last team in this tier, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, the Jaguars I've talked about a good bit this season. One of the points I made in a video I made for them was that something about the Jaguars just felt off. It was like they were they kept giving guys contracts that were solid players, but they were giving them high-end contracts and locking them in for a while and making it feel like they were top 5 at the position where they were really, top 15 or whatever. And there was just a lot of, I don't know if fakeness is the right word, but it felt like they were trying to just let's just act like we're a top contender. Let's just act like we have all these really amazing pieces. You look at them drafting Travon Walker with the number 1 pick, which is a horrible pick, especially after seeing what Aiden Hutchinson has been able to do. And, he's injured right now, but before he got injured, he was amazing. And then you look at some of the other big signings like Trevor Lawrence. I was fine with them signing Trevor Lawrence. That contract was kind of disgusting, though. He wasn't worth that contract, and I think we've seen. I wouldn't say he's a bust necessarily. It's tough to argue that he isn't a bust after this season, but he was not worth the contract he got, and he's not one of these top 3, top 5 guys. I think we saw all the potential, and everyone had their opinions on him being a generational player coming out of college and everything, and we've seen he's busted in that regard. He isn't that. That doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback or that they need to move on from him, but he just isn't that, and I think the Jaguars need to accept that and should have accepted that before they gave him that contract. And then you look at a lot of the other pieces on the offensive line, it's just fine. Travis Etienne is a good running back, but he isn't this Alvin Kamara that they thought he would be. Tank Bigsby didn't have a few breakout moments this year, though. He's a really nice backup for them. And then signing guys like Christian Kirk to these big contracts and Zay Jones and Gabe Davis, just very, very average receivers. Anyways, I've already had this talk about the Jaguars, and I'll link that video up top if you want to watch that. But so much of this team is being close to what they want and just kind of faking it till they make it. And they aren't that. They just are not the team that they wanted to be. Now, the number one thing that this team needs to do in terms of, getting success is firing Doug Peterson. This should have happened a long time ago. This is the main reason, in my opinion, that the record is what it is right now. Doug Peterson should not be a head coach in this league right now. Could he be an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator or something? Somewhere, maybe, but I don't think he's the head coach, and I definitely don't think he's the head coach of the Jaguars. I think he supremely held this team back in a lot of ways. He hasn't been able to establish and build a run game whatsoever. The passing game has been very average. His game management skills are horrible. The defense hasn't come along, even though they do have a lot of really nice pieces. You look at this roster, this is probably one of the most underperforming rosters in the entire league, according to what they do have versus how they've played and performed and what the record is showing. And I'd put a lot of that on Doug Peterson's shoulders for sure. Some of the positives, though, Brian Thomas Jr., it's fantastic. That was obviously a hit for them. Big need for them was getting another receiver like that in the building, which just kind of makes me think, I was trying to talk about positives, but good job drafting him and bringing him in and making him your wide receiver 1. But why sign all those other dudes in free agency that are so average and just unnecessary and don't even fit on this team anymore, like Gabe Davis? And I'm not a big fan of Christian Kirk at all. Why do that and then go and draft someone who's obviously, going to be so much better and had so much more potential? It's you never know with a rookie, right? You never know how a rookie's going to do, but I couldn't meet anyone that had negative things to say about Brian Thomas Jr. I think most of the negative analysis on Brian Thomas Jr. was just, I don't know if he's going to be a fully well-rounded top 5 receiver in the league. He's going to be a 1B or a number 2 receiver that's a really high-end guy. That was most of the negative analysis on him. And I said at the time I really liked this draft pick and thought it was a good pick for them and that he would be a good receiver. So it's just, yeah, I dislike when these teams double dip with free agency and the draft into a position of need, and I'm going to talk about that more later with here's a little hint, the Falcons. But yeah, at least Brian Thomas Jr. is seemingly working out and is playing really well for them. Things that they need to address, like I said, get a new coach. I think they should cut dead weight on this roster. And, one guy that comes to mind is Evan Engram. He's not a horrible tight end by any means. He's dealing with some injuries right now. I don't think you need to keep hauling him around, though. I'd say it's maybe about time to try to get a 3rd round, 4th round pick for him or something, if you can. I think he's more of a 5th round pick kind of value guy. Just cutting dead weight is going to be a big thing with this Jaguars team, especially if you do bring in a new coach. He's going to want to rely on some of the younger talent that he has instead of some of the vets that they have on this team, and I see nothing wrong with that. A lot of the times we see teams kind of like the Panthers or whatever trading away good players that they have, or good players, and that player didn't necessarily work well on that team, and then you're like, oh, they got rid of one of their best players, and there's a big hole there now. Looking at the Panthers specifically, and it's like, well, the receiving core hasn't been any worse since they traded away Deontay Johnson, and we've seen the emergence of Jalen Coker, and it's like when you get a coach in, and he just kind of finds his guys, you'll find out that a lot of players on a team are better than you would have thought to begin with, and you'll also find that some top-tier talent, regardless of them being a top-tier talent and a proven receiver or a proven cornerback or whatever, just isn't the right fit for a team. And I think the Jaguars have a lot of those guys that are just not the right fit for this team and what they need to be doing moving forward. And we'll let some of that be decided by whatever new coach they get in the building, because I will be so shocked if they do not get a new head coach and fire Doug Peterson. Another thing I want to talk about with the Jaguars is the disappointment of this defensive line. I already mentioned Travon Walker, but this guy is just he was not worth the number 1 pick whatsoever. And at the time when they made this pick, a lot of people said it. I was one of those people that did not see the vision. And we're on to year 3, and he hasn't proven being a number 1 pick. And keep in mind, people keep pointing to the fact that he's improved and he's playing well and he's done some good things, and his sack numbers last year were fine. That's great, but we're not talking about someone that you took with the 2nd round pick. We're talking about someone that you took with the number 1 overall pick in the draft. So I think he's been a bust. Eric Armstead is just nowhere to be found either. That was another one of those decisions and picks that they made that felt like they were trying to look like everyone else, or look like everyone else that's doing it right, look like another playoff team, and he's just not a top-tier defensive lineman. He's completely no-showed for them when he's been healthy and when he hasn't. But I will say again for the Jaguars that they shouldn't have the record that they have this season. This roster is better than that, and you get Doug Peterson out of the building, you cut some of the dead weight on this roster, focus on younger talent. I think they're going to be in fine enough shape next season. Now we finally get to move to our next tier. This is the waiting for next year tier. Last tier was number 1 pick contention. I don't know if I said that or not, but this tier is waiting for next year. These are teams that not going to get the number 1 pick. A lot of these teams I'm talking about have stuff to work off of and have a future, but they're definitely waiting for next year to kick in, and that starts with the Bears. Coaching staff's really important. It really is. It's one of the most important things that a football team can have is a solid, well-rounded, sound coaching staff, and the Bears did not have that going into this season. Whether that is Matt Eberflus, who I mentioned, or someone else on this coaching staff that I thought was an even bigger flop than Matt Eberflus was Shane Waldron. Just not a good offensive coordinator. I don't know if he found a job somewhere else or not. I'd be surprised if he's an offensive coordinator for an NFL team this next year. I think if he's staying in the NFL, he's probably moving down to a quarterback's coach sort of position or going to college or something like that. That was a big flop for them. And then Matt Eberflus, like I mentioned earlier, he did have some good things going. The defense was rocking a good bit with him while he was there, and I do think Matt Eberflus can be one of the 32 best head coaches in the league and could get a job coaching somewhere again. I don't think he should be a head coach. Like I said, I think being a defensive coordinator for a team like the Giants would be nice, but the coaching staff this year for the Bears has just been a flop. And then the other thing is the O-line was much worse than people expected. I think it would actually be kind of I'd be remiss to talk about the Bears without starting this off with Caleb Williams and the expectations they had. Like I said, I was going to talk about expectations I had for each team going into the season. My parents just got home, and they had ice cream on the beach. Anyways, as I was talking with the Bears about the Bears, the main thing with the Bears was Caleb Williams going into this season and how big of a deal it was that he was going into the absolute best situation a rookie quarterback or number one overall pick has ever gone into. And that was due to the fact that there was Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze. People forgot the offensive line still wasn't very good. And then we looked at the coaching staff with Matt Eberflus, someone who's a defensive-minded head coach and wouldn't really be doing much with the quarterback at all. So who is it that's in control of his development and game plan? Shane Waldron. So I started the Bears conversation off with saying coaching staff is really important. So I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I saw this all coming. But I also wasn't one of those people saying Bears are for sure going to the playoffs, 10, 11 win team or whatever. I thought they were going to miss the playoffs. But this just dives deeper into the point of how important a coaching staff is. You cannot be in the best situation for a rookie quarterback if your coaching staff is as bad as this one was. And then, again, not to mention the offensive line has been bad this year. When you do look at this receiving core, whether, coming from Cole Kmet to DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, like I mentioned, on paper, you've got a lot of really big names and good pieces. But when you have a offensive coordinator like Shane Waldron, who refuses to get the ball to DJ Moore in any way, forces the ball to Keenan Allen, who's clearly well out of his prime, clearly shouldn't be getting the ball as much as he was, and Rome Odunze, who, as good of a rookie receiver he was coming out, is a rookie and had a rough start to the year. So the situation isn't nearly as good as we thought it was going to be. This isn't the story of Caleb Williams being a generational bust. This is the story of a team that has consistently failed taking a quarterback and kind of sticking him in a similar situation that we see often with teams that are able to take quarterbacks with a number one pick. And, their pick that they had last season that was owed to them was the number 9 pick. So they're really a top 10 worst team last season. Not one. They traded for the one. But I think we learned along this season that this isn't the best situation. I don't think the storyline and what we learned was that Caleb Williams failed despite having one of the best situations a number one pick could have. The storyline we learned is that the situation was completely lied to, or at least we just didn't see through the fog and see that you have a head coach that's proven basically nothing, a head coach that is a defensive-minded guy and clearly doesn't know his way around offensive game planning and controlling an offense and developing a young quarterback. And then you look at the guy that is in charge of that, Shane Waldron, just not good, not a good coordinator. And you look at a poor offensive line, so it really isn't the situation we thought it was going in. But I will say Caleb Williams, he struggled. He hasn't looked exactly how we thought he would. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like he's some generational bust or whatever. It's going to take a few more years for me to get on board with that and agree with that. Moving on to some other things, though. Up until the point when Eberflus was fired, because the defense kind of, changed a good bit when he was. The defense has had a lot of good moments this year. And this team as a whole was a lot closer to having a better record than what it is showing currently. And one of the reasons for that is I'll go back to kind of blaming Eberflus a bit. Winning close games typically comes down to good coaching. And a few of the losses that the Bears had this season were due to bad coaching and bad game management. The no timeout is a good example of that. And then you look at their loss to like the Commanders. Well, what do? Like, you put yourself in a solid position to win that game, and then a Hail Mary that happens once every 5 years gets converted for a touchdown. So that's a tough one to focus on. And they've had a few other close losses this year. But moving on to what the Bears need to do this offseason to improve, I'd say their absolute number one need and what they need to do is pay Ben Johnson literally whatever amount of money he wants and make him the head coach of the team. I think that probably does stick them in the playoffs next season if they get Ben Johnson. Now, the Bears apparently had the opportunity to get Ben Johnson last season and didn't take advantage of it and wanted to roll with Eberflus again, which makes enough sense. They only had Eberflus for a year, and they were going to give him another year with Caleb Williams coming in as a rookie, see what could happen. So it wasn't the worst decision in the world, but it might be too late to get Ben Johnson. I doubt it is, because money talks, and the Bears should have some money and should be able to say, hey, dude, do you want to be the highest paid coach in the NFL and get to work with Caleb Williams and Romo Dunes and have a defense that's already pretty well established? There's a few pieces missing. We'll address that, but do you want that? Because I think Ben Johnson would take that. So that to me is the number one thing they could do, is bring Ben Johnson in, and that alone is going to put them in the playoffs. But moving to some of the specific things, I think you move on from Keenan Allen. This receiving core should be DJ Moore and Romo Dunes. And I forgot to mention earlier, Cole Kmet had a really good season, or has had a really good season. At this point now, with how much the Bears have struggled, his season hasn't looked as good, but he said that Cole Kmet's had a lot of breakout moments, and he's a really good tight end, so that's a good thing for them. But back to some of the things they needed to do in the offseason: get some defensive tackles, fill in those trenches on both sides of the ball, defensive line and offensive line, especially guards, because Ryan Poles just doesn't care about drafting the guard position at all, even though it's one of the more important positions on the offensive line. Like, this league tried to move so heavily to the flashy outside stuff with receivers and giant arm quarterbacks and offensive tackles and edge rushers. And the game is really won. The game of football is realistically won with your guards and your interior nose tackles. And obviously you need all the other stuff. I'm not saying that, to be a Super Bowl caliber team, the only thing you need is to have a really good pair of guards and a really good defensive tackle. It's not what I'm saying, but the league just tried to move so hardcore into having all the flashy stuff that these teams that aren't addressing positions like offensive guard are really struggling. That's what I'll say about that. And let's move on to our next team, which is a team that's kind of paralleled to the Bears. A team I've been, I don't know if hot on is the right word, but I've spent a good amount of time talking about, and a team I followed a lot this year. That is the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers with Bryce Young, which is maybe where we'll start, and we'll talk about our expectations there. My personal expectations of the Panthers were somewhat similar to what's happening now. I didn't expect them to start the year so bad and expect them to have to bench Bryce. But then Bryce came back and he played really well, and the team started having close games. And then they had about 3 games in a row. It was Chiefs, Buccaneers, and Eagles. 3 games that were lost within the final minute of the game, which most people wouldn't have assumed that, especially those 3 teams right there I just mentioned, Bucks, Chiefs, and Eagles, that was ever going to be close with the Panthers. Those 3 games were a couple plays away within the last minute from them winning it. So a lot of people are going to say the only thing that matters is wins and losses. They lost those games. How can you say there's improvement? Look at the Panthers last season. Watch all their losses, which I was going to say all their games, but watch all their losses and all their games is basically the same thing from last season. And then watch the 3 games that the Panthers had against the Chiefs, Buccaneers, and Eagles and tell me that's not improvement. It's an absolutely ridiculous statement to make, is to say that, I get winning matters. I know it does. But you're an idiot if you think that there's absolutely no difference between 0-3 in this stretch and some other 0-3 in last year's stretch of games. So regardless of them having losses, they've improved a lot. One of the things that I think contributed to that is Coach Dave Canales, who I was really high on. I sometimes I base opinions on coaches and stuff by watching their press conferences. Not entirely, obviously, but it's one of those things that I grew a little bit of an attachment to Dave Canales, and it was just one of my guys. And watching him in press conferences led me to really root for him, and I still do. I'm not about to take this back or anything, but you just listen to him talk. He's a very confident guy, and he's very well spoken, and he just seems like he knows what he's doing. So looking at that and how this team is played, I think it's obvious that he's a big reason for the improvement that the Panthers have had. And he's a big reason for the improvement that Bryce Young has had. And so many people wanted them to just forget about Bryce Young, trade him away. He was a bust. Should have taken CJ Stroud. Sure, maybe they should have taken CJ Stroud or whatever. But what we were able to see this season, even in losses, what we've seen from Bryce Young over the last few weeks, minus the most recent game with the Cowboys, what we've seen from him proves that they didn't totally F this up majorly. He played really well in those 3 games this season with the Chiefs, Buccaneers, and Eagles, and especially that last drive against the Eagles, trying to put it away, breaking tackles, slipping out of the pocket, making throws downfield. That looked like a number 1 overall pick. That looked like a number 1 overall pick right there. That looked like the guy that they thought they were taking. So you can tell me about the wins and losses and how, winning is what matters, and losing, it doesn't matter how you lose, it doesn't matter. You can tell me that all you want. The assurance that they've gotten from seeing that Bryce Young still has those things in him and can do it in this level, in this professional level of football, is earth-shattering for them. Earth-shattering in a positive way. I guess I shouldn't have used the phrase earth-shattering. It's groundbreaking is probably a better thing to say. So that was huge for them. That's where I'll start with the Panthers. On to the other side of the ball, and I'll get back to the offense in a little bit, the defense. This is the worst rostered defense in the NFL, in the league. Just in terms of the actual players that they have. It's funny to look at the Panthers depth chart and look at their defense. It's like Madden generated players and names. Like, it's guys you've just never heard of. And then you look at their history, it's like they legit are coming from the XFL. And there's so many guys like that. And for a team that has that roster, that had Derek Brown suffer from a season-ending injury, it's clear that one of the main issues with this team is the defense. Now, again, I said I'm a big fan of Dave Canales. Despite those issues on the defense, despite the poor roster talent on defense and the rest of the team on offense, because it's not all solid there too, they've kept a lot of games really close, and they've had a lot of really good moments. So that's how I feel about that. And I did mention the Derek Brown injury. That was heartbreaking for them. You got to keep in mind, he'll be back next season. Hopefully, he's still Derek Brown, but you never know. And then moving back to the offense, this offense does have a lot of nice pieces. I mean, if we're talking about Chuba Hubbard, who's completely broken out, got a big contract, earned it, made total sense to me because I think he's kind of one of those guys that you give a contract to show like, hey, if you can be a part of this culture that we want to bring, if you can establish what we're trying to establish, not just in terms of how you play, but also your mentality and who you are as a player, we're going to pay you. And that was a big deal for them this season, is getting Chuba Hubbard a big contract, which they did. So he's been a really nice piece. Xavier Legette has been fine. He's had some disappointing moments for sure, especially in that Eagles game with the drop to not necessarily put it away, but to go up, 5 points or something like that with 40-something seconds left on the board against the Eagles. That was a disappointing moment, but you still lean on him going into the future. You still want him to be your guy, so that's still a player to be thinking about. And then Jalen Coker has been great also. Another guy that came out of nowhere that, I was aware of and was hoping he'd get a shot somewhere, and it happened to be the Panthers, and he's done a lot of good stuff in that time frame. Adam Thielen still playing at a high level despite his age. He's another good culture guy for this team. I mentioned Deontay Johnson earlier, who only played like the first 3 weeks before he was traded, but I think one of the reasons he was traded is because he didn't match that culture. He didn't match what they're trying to bring, and sometimes you got to do stuff like that. You got to get rid of a player that you know is talented and really good at a position of need because they don't match what you're trying to do, and it's just not going to work, and you're paying them all that money to basically be equivalent to a Jalen Coker. So everything isn't Madden where everyone's just at the same overall or whatever constantly. It's different. It's not a video game. The other thing on offense, there's two other things actually on offense that I think have been good this season and that you can look forward to. Jatavion Sanders, tight end, unfortunately suffered a pretty rough injury around his neck this year, falling on his neck. It doesn't look like it's going to ruin his NFL career. I think he should be back by next season. I don't know if he's going to be back this season. There's only like 3 games left, but he played really good football for a few weeks there. So I think that's something someone they're gonna want to lean on and look forward to. And then also this offensive line has been good. Like, not just serviceable, it's been good. So this team has a lot to look forward to, for sure. Things that they need to focus on. Look, although losing has been tough, they're getting an early pick. So they're getting an early pick. They have their pieces. They got to see that Bryce Young can work in this league. I think this season is going to end up feeling like a success for them. Just don't get rid of Dave Canales because you're scared. Keep him on the team. He's clearly making this team a lot better. And then use one of that early pick that they're probably going to have. It'll probably be a top 8 pick, top 10 pick. Get someone on defense. Cornerback, edge rusher, D-line, whoever you want. It literally any, except for like a linebacker, just because that's not as valuable, but any main position on defense that you're able to get, just take them, because this defense has issues across the board. If you want to get a corner to match up with J.C. Horn, that's fine with me. Get an edge rusher, that's fine. Get another defensive tackle, that's great. Match him with Derek Brown. So that's really what the Panthers need to do, is just anything on defense. And then obviously getting some more receiving help would be great. Maybe bringing in another vet that maybe isn't as old and doesn't lack as much of a future as Adam Thielen, but is also a little bit more established and fits this culture better than Deontay Johnson, and is also older than Xavier Legette. Someone like that would be great. Stick in this receiving room as well. So, yeah. And then the other thing is stick with Bryce. I think he's proved that, despite the loss against the Cowboys, I think he's proved that shipping him off for a 6th-round pick is not going to really get you anywhere, and he can win some games next season if we get a better team established and if we let this culture build up. Now on to the next team in this tier, the New Orleans Saints. It's time to hit the reset button. They've been fighting for 7 wins a season for a while. They put themselves in cap hell, in absolute purgatory. No team is in a worse cap situation than the Saints right now. They keep trying to play this game, and it's not working for them. And I mentioned this earlier with the Titans, with like just they let players go sometimes that have been good for them, and it keeps biting them in the butt. So the Saints really they got to hit the reset button on this. Get over this hump with the cap issues you have one bad season, and then rebuild from the ground up, because this is not working. Derek Carr isn't good. Offensive line still struggling. I like Alvin Kamara, and I'll talk him up more later, but he's not going to save this team. Onto the defense, they still have no pass rushing present. They can't find a coach that'll stick around. Cornerback room has a lot of really interesting pieces, like Alontae Taylor, and Kool-Aid McKinstry's been good. They let go or traded Marshawn Lattimore, but there's some interest there. And then other than that, it's like, dude, get over it already. This isn't working. This idea they have is just, it's not going according to plan. They're not getting the value out of playing this cap game that they've been playing. They're not getting the value out of it. There's a few pieces on this team that you keep for sure, but man, it's time to let it go. Derek Carr, I think you got to start with Derek Carr, honestly, and he's injured right now, so it's tough to make this whole thing a rant about him, but this wasn't a good signing for them to make, and bringing in Derek Carr was the perfect player for them. Derek Carr is what the Saints have been for the last few years, just fine. He's just a fine quarterback. He's not clutch, and I don't want to sit here and nag on about Derek Carr or anything, but they just insist on these 7 to 8 win seasons, and it's really caught up on them. I don't know if they'll finish with 7 or 8 wins or whatever. I think, what are they at, 5 or 6 right now? I put them probably too high in this power ranking, because, Derek Carr is hurt. But the reason I'm not worried about dropping them all the way down is because, is there that much of a difference between Derek Carr and Jake Haener? I don't think so. And, this offensive line has shown some improvement, but just across the board, nothing about this team is good enough, really. I like I said, I like some of the young pieces, but it's been really disappointing. Dennis Allen should have gotten fired, but it still sucks. It's still like, what do you do now? Like, who are you going to bring in that's going to fix this program? I don't know. I got a list of coaching candidates I kept nearby I can read off. Are you going to get Ben Johnson? Probably not. Joe Brady? Maybe. I don't think he's going to turn this place around entirely. Liam Cohen for the Bucks? No. Kellen Moore? He's going to be a good coaching candidate. I'm not talking negatively about these head coaches. Just like, who's going to come in and fix this, especially after this season when this stuff does catch up to you and you don't have any money in free agency, you're not re-signing anyone really, and you're just stuck with probably what's going to be one of the worst rosters in the entire league. Who's going to want to take this job? And they've put themselves in this position. You look at some of the bright spots they've had too, like on offense with Chris Olave. He's been hurt. He might have to retire. He's on his 4th concussion. Rashid Shaheed out for the season too. Their best offensive piece other than Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill's fun. He's great. He's 34. There's no future longevity with him. This is probably one of the bleakest futures any team in the league has, is the Saints. I don't see one of these top candidate head coaches coming in and wanting to take this job. I could be wrong on that. Maybe this is somehow where Ben Johnson wants to go. But this is a team that needs a coach. The interim head coach they have now, that might be the consideration, is just keeping him around, because honestly, they've looked like the team looks like it's been playing harder with him, and they've gotten a few wins under him. So maybe that's the move, is keep your interim coach around. I think Darren Harizzi or something like that. I don't even know his name. I don't watch the Saints very much. I watch enough to know what I'm talking about, so I'm not talking out of my ass with them, but I don't like watching them on Sunday. I'm more of like watch the film on them because I have to. But what do you do now? Let's talk about that. Hit the reset button, like I said. I think you also move on from Derek Carr. You're due to finances, you're just gonna have to work through the draft, and you're gonna have to trade assets away. I would say trade someone like Cam Jordan. I'm pretty sure he's retiring after this season, and if he doesn't, I don't imagine anyone trading for him. If anything, it would be a 7th round pick. And then stop digging this money hole. A few of those things go hand in hand, like with the hitting the reset button, stop digging this money hole. Those are pretty similar, but geez, the Saints, man, I've had enough of them. I'm not a fan of this team and what they do. There's players on this team I like. I really like Rashid Shaheed. I really like what Taysom Hill has done. Alvin Kamara, to me, is one of the most underrated running backs of this decade. One of the most underrated players of this decade. I mean, looking at his stats and his accolades, watching his highlight reel, this dude's legit, and he doesn't get the love he deserves. And even now, him being, 30 now? He's still playing at a pretty high level. So I love Alvin Kamara. Love a lot of players on this team. The management and the way this team has been run and owned has bugged me for a while. And I really jumped off the ship with them when they brought in Derek Carr. Because like I said, it's like they just took the personified version of the Saints and made him their starting quarterback. So that's enough of the Saints for me. On to another huge disappointment. Another team that's probably going to get me riled up. The Jets. This is probably one of the biggest disappointments I can remember in a while. When you look at the whole structure of the team and the roster, like, this is easily a playoff caliber roster. Isn't, though. Why is that? Is it just because of Aaron Rodgers? No. Is a lot of it because of Aaron Rodgers? Yeah. And, there's still Jets fans that will fight me over this take and will fight me over this, and they'll look at his stats and be like, they'll point to his stats and just, like, try to absolve him all of blame. And it's like, are you brainwashed? Like, what has he been... Do you watch his, like, does he post things I don't know about on the or does he go on the Pat McAfee show and brainwash his fans or something? This conversation does start with Aaron Rodgers, and really quickly, I will go over my expectations of them going into this season. I thought this was going to be a 9-10 win team, and maybe get in the playoffs. I looked at this roster and said, this is a Super Bowl caliber roster. I don't believe they're going to go anywhere that far because I think Aaron Rodgers is going to try to control too much, and Nathaniel Hackett is a horrible offensive coordinator. It's too much of the Aaron Rodgers show going on. Robert Saleh is a fine coach, but he wasn't equipped to get as much out of this roster as he could have, and that's true. That was true, despite the fact that they probably shouldn't have fired him. That's true. He didn't have what it takes to get enough out of Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams and, the offensive line they had. And look, you look at, like, the offensive line, they haven't been playing extremely well this season, no. But you also look at how this season has been going, and I look at someone like Tyron Smith. I fully believe he's just there for the paycheck and then to retire. I don't think he cares anymore. And why do you think that is? Well, look at the situation they're in. Their coach, quarterback, and GM are all the same person. It's Aaron Rodgers. Honestly, I mean, when you do look at the offensive line, you look at the PFF grades, you look at the stats and everything, it's not been as bad as people are saying. So why am I blaming Aaron Rodgers for all this? I know I need to make, some examples for this claim I'm making. Well, this is a guy that came into this program and wanted control. And he wanted to not necessarily come in and say, I want to be the GM, I want to be the coach, blah, 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 or anything. I don't trust Aaron Rodgers as a person. When I look at him talk in pressers, he seems like a very fake individual. I don't like Aaron Rodgers very much. Historically, he's been a top player, but some of the reasons I think he's a huge reason to blame for all this, he brought in most of this team. A lot of this team he did. And I fully believe he was a huge part in them firing Robert Saleh, which now you're seeing those same people I was saying that will excuse Aaron Rodgers and place the blame elsewhere. Why do you think the defense is so bad? That's what they go to, is saying that, what is he supposed to do when the defense is as bad as his? Why do you think the defense is that bad? Is it maybe because your defensive-minded head coach is fired now? And why do you think he got fired? I guarantee you Aaron Rodgers played a hand in that. A huge hand in that. So you wonder why, your defense is bad and why this team has horrible management skills to finish and win games. Because that's the other thing I keep seeing is people saying this team is like 5, 6, 7 plays away from being 8-4, being 9-3, or whatever. Part of being a team that wins those games is having a head coach and having a well-run organization, having a well-run team. This team has zero cohesion on offense or defense. It has zero management and chemistry whatsoever. It has no direction. It's a bunch of really highly touted, highly valuable players like Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams. Offensive line, like I mentioned, is underrated. And then Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he's washed. It's the fact that there's no sense of direction for this team whatsoever. People keep blaming things like management. Well, you fired the management. The GM and coach are gone. And you're expecting this interim guy to step up and do it. And there's so much talent on this team that is being wasted because, as I've been saying throughout this whole video, coaching matters. It matters a lot. And whether Saleh should have been fired or not doesn't matter, because once he does get fired, you put yourself in this position where you don't have one of the most important aspects of any good and quality team. You don't have a head coach. And when you have an offensive coordinator like Nathaniel Hackett, or had, you don't have anything easy on offense. You don't have any drawn-up plays. The offense today for the Jets is Aaron goes to the line of scrimmage, looks around, looks at the defense, and calls a bunch of audibles into what he wants based on what he sees. And he wants everyone to read his mind and know that he wants Mike Williams to catch it on the red line. That's the offense. No other team in the league does that. No other team in the league does that and is successful, for sure. If any other team does anything similar to that, they're not successful. Now, having a quarterback that, because this is something Tom Brady could do, right? Like he'd get his play calls, but then he'd see, teams in cover 2 or whatever. So he's like, okay, I got a cover 2 beater. I want to go to. We're gonna adjust this and fire it off. Well, Tom Brady played on the same team for well over a decade. Had a coach that trusted him. Had players he built relationships with. Had chemistry built with them. Had receivers that knew what he meant because he impounded it into their brain during practice because he was at practices. He was actually at practice and not on vacation. Sound familiar? Tom Brady had those things. Aaron Rodgers came in, tore his Achilles, sat a year, whatever, came back this season, and just expected everyone to be able to read his mind. And this is not a real football team, what we have here. This is, it's backyard football. It's an attempt at, it's like trying to win the Turkey Bowl at Thanksgiving with your brothers and your uncle or whatever, where you're drawing up plays on your hand or whatever. Because you got rid of the consistency. You got rid of the easy buttons of having an offensive coordinator that maybe sometimes Aaron Rodgers isn't able to see what's going on and see what's the best play call here. He shouldn't be making those calls all the time anyways, but maybe he isn't. So when you have a good coordinator that can make that play call, that's an easy button, it really helps out the team and really helps move forward. So, and I was talking a bunch about Nathaniel Hackett. Who brought in Nathaniel Hackett? Why didn't Nathaniel Hackett go to the Jets? Who made that decision? It was Aaron Rodgers. So, listen, I know this whole thing is a hit piece on him, and people are just going to call me a hater, and they're going to be like, he's so much more successful than you. I know he's more successful than me. I know he has a ring. I know he's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. I still think he's one of the most talented, most gifted quarterbacks of all time. I don't think this last couple seasons take away from that. He still is will still be considered one of the best quarterbacks of all time. That fact doesn't take away from what he's doing right now, which is an absolute atrocity. And he's completely just thrown the Jets franchise on their head, which was already run horribly. So it's not like I care about what the Jets franchise does and the ownership or whatever. I've never been a fan of them, but here's what I do want to say. I'm not projecting bias. I know I just said I don't really care or have any love for the Jets necessarily, but I'm not a biased person when it comes to football. I'm calling what I see, and he's really thrown the Jets franchise on their head with promises of greatness and just give me the reins and let me take over, and I'll get you your ring. And it's gone horribly. So what do the Jets do now? Get rid of Aaron Rodgers. You will not get a worthwhile coach as long as he is on the team. And Aaron Rodgers is not a good coach. So that's the first thing. And then I'd say pair a new QB with a good coach. Which that goes in hand with the last thing I just said there. Get a new quarterback and get a new coach. Pretty simple there. There's some other things that need to be addressed. You can't address those until you fix the absolute disgusting, horrible mess you've made this season. You cannot address the offensive line and the fact that Garrett Wilson wants out. You can't address those things until you fix the two I just mentioned, because no one's going to want to be a part of this. Ben Johnson will not be a part of this. Brian Flores will not be a part of this. Joe Brady will not be a part of this. They know better, because it's their career on the line when they get there, and then it's what Aaron says. It's Aaron's way or the highway, and all of a sudden they're 3-9 again. So that's what you do with the Jets. And the last team in this tier, the Dallas Cowboys. Disappointing season for them. My expectations going into the year was that they were going to be worse. They've been a whole lot worse. My expectations going into this year is that they would be worse than they were last season. That's true. I didn't think they'd be this bad. Now, part of that, again, like we mentioned with a lot of these teams, injuries. Injuries have played a big deal in this. What's the worst aspect on the Dallas Cowboys, though? What is the worst thing that they have going for them? There's a lot of little things. They need a second receiver. They need a more stable cornerback room. They need someone that's not going to get hurt 8 weeks out of the season, because right now it's Deron Bland's playing, and then Trayvon Diggs is hurt, and then Diggs comes back and Bland's hurt. That's something in there. The worst thing on the Cowboys, though, like I mentioned with a few other teams again, it's the trench play, offensive line and defensive line. The offensive line hasn't been very good. I wouldn't say that's their main issue. The defensive line and in general their ability to stop the run game, it's bad. It's horrible. And the league kept trying to move to this explosive, fun receivers and quarterbacks and stuff. And this season we're saying have a run game, be able to stop the run and play efficient football in the pass game, and you can win football games. That's what we've seen this year. And the Cowboys have probably the worst run defense in the league. And who could say they saw it coming? I'll tell you, me. You didn't address it. You didn't address it at all. The one thing they did do to address it was Mozzie Smith a few years ago, but he was not anything as promised. He was supposed to be this, big run stopping nose tackle that was going to fill the last hole on this defense. And he's just been bad. One thing that really confused me with him is, why did he lose a bunch of weight? Whose decision was that? Was that Mozzie's? I doubt it. Players don't just randomly lose or gain a bunch of weight. Usually someone tells them to. So I don't know what happened there. But, discussing the Cowboys here, it reminds me of what I was saying with the Jaguars, which is they keep doing these things that are almost right and thinking that it was the best decision to make, and they have a bunch of these players that are like almost top tier kind of thinking, like Dak Prescott, like paying him like he's a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, and he just isn't. CeeDee Lamb just isn't a top 3 receiver. He's just not. He's not a top 5 receiver. And it's just kind of caught up to them because they don't have the rest of the roster for these guys that aren't tier 1 players to keep up with it, to keep up with the amount of holes that they have on this roster. And Jerry Jones, man, I could yap about him all day because, wow, he's really stepped in and screwed this team over. Wow, Jerry Jones. This is why owners need to be owners and not try to do everything else. Jerry Jones stepped into the Cowboys when he first got the team, fell into some Super Bowls because he had a Super Bowl caliber team he bought, basically, and I know he played a hand in getting some other guys in there to help with that, but he thinks he's the god of this, and you're seeing how everything's playing out now. He just isn't. And the all-in stuff and the no off season that happened where they did nothing in the off season, and then the way they waited to sign CeeDee Lamb so they could pay him an extra $5 to $10 million a year instead of what they could have if they signed him early, because Jerry Jones wants to be a hard ass and play hardball with everyone, and then just get screwed over by it because CeeDee Lamb can just get paid somewhere else. I don't know why he thought that was going to work. And same thing with Dak Prescott, just waiting for the market to blow up, and now you're paying these guys more money than you need to, and not being able to address the other issues on this team, like the offensive and defensive line, like filling out the cornerback room, like as undervalued as linebacker has been. That's one of the main issues with this team. That's why their coverage over the middle and their run defense is so poor. One of the main reasons is they don't have linebackers. And like DeMarvion Overshown I like a lot, but he's one of these like safety linebacker hybrids. He's not the run stopper, plug up gaps from tackle to tackle kind of guy. He's the coverage guy, and he's athletic and fast, and that's great, but that they just didn't address the other positions of need here on the defense. So moving on from that, I don't know if I mentioned this at all, but Mike McCarthy needs to go. They should have fired him last year. And it's like, I know people want to say, like, how do you fire someone that consistently went to the playoffs and went 12-5 or whatever? You fire them because you had a roster that should have won you a Super Bowl, or should have gotten you damn closer than losing first round. That's how and why you fire him. And the fact that he didn't get fired mid-season, I can appreciate the fact that Jerry Jones fights for his guys and really is all in on them. But that will be one of the biggest downfalls of this team, is keeping Mike McCarthy around. And it has been one of the biggest downfalls of this team this season. So that's going to have to change. And then moving on to what they need to do in the offseason, O-line, D-line is going to be big. Linebackers filling in those gaps. You have to spend money. You just do. Have to make some trades. In terms of the draft, I think Genti would be great, and he would fill a need. But like I just said, they have so many other spots for investment. I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. It kind of depends on where their pick is at this point anyways, because they did just beat the Panthers, and I don't think they're in the top 10 anymore. I could be wrong on that, but regardless, the Cowboys definitely had a disappointing, lackluster year, and it's going to take a lot of change across the board for them to fix that. All right, moving on to our next tier of teams. This is teams that are missing the playoffs this year, not quite getting it done and not quite getting in. I think at this point things could change, and these tier names aren't, entirely set. More important thing is the ranking and everything. But start this tier off, the 49ers. Another great big disappointment, and disappointments done by injuries. Injuries have really shot this team down. My expectations of the 49ers going into the season is the expectation that I've had for them the last 3 or 4 years. They're going to be playoff contenders, and they're going to be fine. They're going to be a really tough outing every week against whoever they play. One of the better rosters in the league. Brock Purdy is someone I believed in. I still believe in Brock Purdy, but just talking about the expectations going into the season. And they're sitting here with the record that they have now, and that loss that they had to the Rams, 6-12 or something, 6-9. And, a lot of this is injuries, and I'm trying to figure out what else could it be. Because there's other teams that are heavily injured, and I've been talking about injuries a whole lot, but here we're looking at the Lions have more injuries than anyone else, and they're 12-2, and they're first or second in the NFC, so how much can you really blame injuries, especially a team like the 49ers who have Kyle Shanahan, who we're going to talk about. One thing that I think plays into this is the 49ers specifically are a team that has been kind of a super team. They've done things a little bit differently than some of the other super teams we've seen. The 49ers have had an amazing receiving core, from Brandon Ayuk to Deebo Samuel to Juwan Jennings, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey as a receiving back and just as a runner. The one thing they haven't had is a good offensive line. They have a very poor offensive line, roster-wise. They work around having a poor offensive line because of all the weapons they have and because of the system they play in. The system that they play in doesn't require having a fully well-dressed offensive line. They're moving around a lot. They're getting the ball out quick. There's a lot of screens. They do a lot of things to cover up for having a poor offensive line. So then you see this team having a couple injuries on the offense and the receiving core with like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo and Christian McCaffrey, and those guys were all kind of injured at different times. And it's like, okay, so those guys are injured, but there's still teams in the league right now that, despite the injuries they've been dealing with, don't have as many weapons that the 49ers have. So why are they struggling to succeed? It's because things like having a bad offensive line catch up to them when they can't make up for it with their play calling and with the players that they have on the field. So when a super team like the 49ers loses some key playmakers like Christian McCaffrey and Deebo and Brandon Ayuk and everything, something like the offensive line is going to go from being, it's a problem, but it's not really a problem, we work around it. It goes from that to we need a new offensive line entirely. The other thing I want to say about the 49ers is this is a very unlucky team for a lot of this year specifically, I'll say. Not historically really, but within the last 5 years. First of all, Charvarius Ward, Trent Williams, both losing their children losing their lives this season. First of all, absolutely devastating. I'm sorry to hear that. I know they're not going to watch this, but if somehow this reaches them, my condolences and my heart goes out to you. I don't mean to make everything about the football that I'm talking about, but realistically, the human in me, more than anything, is saying that's going to play into effect of how this team is doing more than it isn't. Someone having your top player having to play with something tragic like that happening, he's not going to be your top player for a little while, and I don't blame him. And that happening to two of your top members, and then, Ricky Pearsall gets shot at the start of the season, and there's risk and concern about him dying. Luckily, he comes back, and he's healthy now. Brandon Ayuk, and just the whole list of everyone else they've had injured. And I've just been talking about the offense, but the list goes to the defense too. Nick Bosa has been out. So this has been a really rough year for the 49ers with just having horrible luck. Now, one thing I do want to talk about outside of the roster is Kyle Shanahan. Like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to discuss him a bit because some people are saying that he should be fired. I cannot get on board with that. I can't. That's ridiculous to me. And some people were saying he should have been fired after last season when they lost the Super Bowl. Now I realize the fan base I'm talking to that has takes like that are ignorant and say wild things like that. Like he can't win the Super Bowl. Like, you got to fire him. If you have a coach that consistently puts your team in Super Bowl contention, and you fire them because they lose a Super Bowl, it's absolutely asinine to me. Absolutely asinine. I don't even want to talk about that take anymore, but just moving back to Kyle Shanahan, you definitely got to keep this guy around. This is a blue chip coach for sure. Is he as good as I thought he was? Is he as invincible as I thought he was? No, he isn't. And I don't think he's the best coach in the league right now. But this is the 49ers coach, and this is the 49ers coach going into the future. Absolutely. I think that's what is going to happen, and I think that's what should happen. The questions I do have in terms of team management are with the general manager. They've had some nice pulls in the draft, right? And they've made some good moves. You look at a lot of the super team that they have had with Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle being a really good draft pick, and Brock Purdy finding him and Mr. Irrelevant and everything, drafting Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa kind of fell into your lap. I mean, who else were you going to take? They've done some good stuff, but they've whiffed on so many picks as well. So many picks. They will so often, the 49ers will just burn third, fourth round picks or whatever. And like taking Jake Moody with a third or fourth round pick, I think it was fourth, things like that just really rub me the wrong way. And then I also look at how they've handled, and I made a whole video on this, I'll leave it up here, but how they handled the Brandon Ayuk situation. They draft Ricky Pearsall seemingly as someone to directly transition from Ayuk to Pearsall, or maybe in the event that they can't get Ayuk, they have someone with very similar skill set to replace him. And then they signed Brandon Ayuk to a crazy top-end receiver deal. They let him scare you into giving him that deal. And that whole situation was just handled poorly, and I think it is time to move on from general management and whoever is a part of the drafting in general, other than, like I said, Shanahan. But yeah, I think these are some of the big issues with the 49ers, because they're getting to a point now where their Super Bowl window isn't necessarily closing, but it's not as automatic every year that you're going to get in the playoffs and you're going to win the first couple rounds, and you just got to win those last two games. That's done. So now you're at a point where we got to start drafting well. We got to start using those third, second round picks for really good, really high value, high level picks that are going to benefit our team. Something else I forgot to mention was the Trey Lance situation too. That was horrible. That's one of the worst. Like, that got covered up because the team was still good and they found Brock Purdy. That was like, they traded so much to get Trey Lance just for him to be the third string on the Cowboys after a couple seasons. That was a total flop too. So, yeah, that's how I feel about the 49ers and what they've had going this season, what the future brings. Moving on to another team I'm probably going to rant about a little bit too. The Atlanta Falcons. Next team in this tier. At the time of making this video, I have just found out, not just, but like earlier today, Kirk Cousins has been benched and Michael Penix will be starting their next game. Here's the thing that bugged me, that's pissing me off right now and bugging me about the Falcons and the narrative with them. This idea that the Falcons were smart, we were wrong, and they were actually smart for drafting Penix. Because now that Kirk's playing bad, they can start Penix. Here's why that bugs me and that's stupid. Sure, drafting Penix was a good idea. I'm not going to disagree with that. You still signed Kirk Cousins to a massive contract. You still have all the payment that you have to do with him. You still put your team at a deficit by playing him and him playing horribly. And I made a joke about it in my last video that they don't want to look stupid by benching Kirk too soon because they paid him. But they also don't want to look stupid by not starting Penix because they drafted him with the number 8 pick. And that's really the situation they put themselves in. So no, they aren't smart, secretly geniuses for drafting Penix, and we all owe them an apology. We don't owe them an apology at all. This has gone horribly. Now they need to pray and hope that Michael Penix plays his ass off. And I like Penix, and I'm not even going to say anything negative about him. He very well could. That doesn't change the fact that you gave Kirk Cousins that contract to flop around. And this is the reality of the situation they're in. Whether it was the number 8 pick or it was all of that money and all that capital and the free agent money they had. Your defense still sucks, and you hardly were able to address and fix that. It still sucks. There's still not nearly enough pieces on this team. So whether it was the number 8 pick or it was the 120, or I guess for that one season it would have been about 40, 50 million, something like that. The defense has been this bad for years, and that still hasn't really been addressed. You get Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates in the same safety group. That's sweet. Other than that, the Judon thing's flopped. AJ Terrell is still by himself in the corner room. What else do you have going on? I mean, Arnold Ebiketie been okay, but like Grady Jarrett's older. Like, there's so many problems on this defense. And I look over at the offense, and there's so much to look forward to and so much to be happy about and just aspire to turn into greatness. And it feels like they really screwed the pooch on this. And I had the take earlier, and this is where I will kind of admit my wrong in this. My take for what the Falcons did in the offseason is that they should have either signed Kirk Cousins or drafted Penix. I should have just said they should have just drafted Penix. Because looking with hindsight now, there was no good reason to think Kirk Cousins was going to do well on the Falcons. I mean, there was some, he's so much more beat up with the injury than I thought. And it's like, you can't really predict that. But we're talking, it was all laid out there. A 37, 38-year-old who's never been an elite super clutch quarterback, who's coming off a good season, except for the fact that he missed half the year with a torn Achilles or ACL. I can't remember. Sorry about that. But there's so much writing on the wall showing that this wasn't going to work with Kirk, and I was bought into either one of them. I should have just been bought into Penix, but that's just where I'll admit I was wrong. On to other things. Raheem Morris, he's been okay, but just not what we hoped, not what I hoped. He had this video of his first meeting, his first time addressing the whole team in the offseason. And if you're watching this right now, there's a good chance you've seen it, but if you haven't, you can just Google it. Raheem Morris first team meeting speech or whatever. I watched that video and was fully bought in on him. I was like, dude, the Falcons are easily going to win this division, have 11-12 wins, and will be absolute dogs. I just loved his mentality and what he had to say. And that's a good aspect of him and his game. I still think it is those kinds of things. He's not elite at fixing and changing a defense. He hasn't made this defense much better. And I'll tell you what, this offense has been a disappointment, and it's not just Kirk. We got to talk about Kyle Pitts. He's a bust. And we can't just keep saying it's that they don't have a quarterback or they don't have a coach or whatever. Kyle Pitts at the position he's at, because I know he's a tight end, but he's like a receiver. He's a receiver. Plays a little bit more tight end at times and stuff. The position he's at, someone that goes with the 4th pick, that is as highly regarded and seen as he was, should make an impact way stronger and way more obviously than he has been, despite the poor quarterback play the Falcons have been dealing with and despite not having a really good head coach. And a good example of that, Brock Bowers. Pretty similar kind of how we viewed them going into this year. We all saw, Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts in the same realm of level of prospect. At the same position, 2 tight ends that play some tight end but are receiving threats, play some receiver, you move them around, both kind of doing the same thing there. And Brock Bowers, with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew and Antonio Pierce, is on pace to destroy tight end records, rookie record, and just records in general for tight ends. Kyle Pitts has done nothing. Just because he's a bust doesn't mean I think he's a bad player. And maybe this is on us. Maybe it's on football media and fans more than anything that we put such high expectations on a player. But he hasn't met those expectations or anywhere near them. And when you consider the fact that Jamar Chase was on the board and Penei Sewell was on the board, it makes it even worse. So I think we got to call it how it is with Kyle Pitts. Someone I loved coming out. I didn't want to say this and admit this. He's just not what we thought. And it isn't just because he doesn't have a quarterback or coach. It's not. Now, Penix could come in and start lighting him up and throw him the ball a whole bunch. Maybe he does play a lot better. That doesn't change what I'm saying necessarily, because this, like I was saying, this position, like the receiver and anyone who's receiving the ball, those positions, and sometimes like cornerback on the defensive side, those guys usually step in, and if they are generational or they are a next level player, they usually step in, and it doesn't matter who it is, they play really good. Brock Bowers and Malik Neighbors, 2 great examples from this year. It doesn't matter who's the quarterback. Malik Neighbors is going to get open. You're going to throw him the damn ball. They have that kind of impact. Jamar Chase is one of those guys. Now, he got to play with Joe Burrow, so I don't want to get that cross or anything, but Jamar Chase was one of those kinds of guys. Kyle Pitts wasn't one of those kinds of guys. At this point in time right now, I'm pretty sure this division is still technically winnable. I don't think they're going to do it, though. I mean, Michael Penix is going to have to be rookie of the year caliber, which he can't win because there's only like 3 or 4 games left, but he's going to have to be that caliber of player for them to really turn this around, in my opinion. Right, on to the next team, same tier. We have the Indianapolis Colts. A lot of interesting stuff going on with them this season, mainly around Anthony Richardson, the quarterback they drafted last season. His first full year starting, except for when he got benched for a little bit. He's stabilized a good bit, and he's gotten back to a spot where you feel hopeful of him. But he still isn't there yet. He's still going to need some time. And my couple videos ago, I made a video talking about benching and stuff, and I brought him up a lot. You should go watch that if you want some more of my opinions on Anthony Richardson. But regardless, where Anthony Richardson is right now is he's still a very young quarterback, still has a lot to develop, a lot to improve on. And he has to get better for people to really get bought in on this team and what AR is doing. But it hasn't been all doom and gloom this season. There's been a lot of good moments. So that's what I want to say there. The other thing is Shane Steichen. I think he's a solid coach, but I kind of feel similar to him as Raheem Morris, where I was really bought in on Shane Steichen. Not as impressed as I was with Shane Steichen. I think he's a good coach. He's a quality coach. Not one of those guys that I really see hitting that next level and being an elite guy that you need to have. This defense, it's bad. Kwity Paye hasn't worked out. The play calling and the design of the defense doesn't really fit a whole lot of this team, especially Leatu Latu and some of the guys they've drafted over the years. It seems like Gus Bradley's just running his defense regardless of who's on it, which isn't the smart way to go about things. Why draft someone just to make them play something they're not comfortable with? And they haven't been playing Leatu Latu in a very comfortable way, and that's one of my guys. That's one I loved coming out of the draft, so I'm going to stick up for him a bit. Cornerback room needs a lot of help. The linebacker room's fine. It's not as good as people think. It's not, because here's the thing. The linebacker room gets a lot of tackles, so people see that, and they're like, oh, they're some of the best linebackers in the league. It's fine. I'm not going to sit here and talk negatively on Tyre Franklin necessarily, but you got to realize the system that they play in funnels a lot of their the runs that they face to the linebackers. Yeah, they still have to make those plays, they still have to make those tackles and read things correctly, but just the way they play, it blows those tackle stats up a bit. So that's something I wanted to say there. I am having questions about the GM situation for the Colts. Like I said, just drafting guys like Leatu Latu and them not really matching the scheme all that well. They've had some really good draft moments over the last couple years, especially with like getting an Adonai Mitchell late. Josh Downs also, and getting Jonathan Taylor. But I'd like to see them spend more money in free agency, that's for sure. And just quit ignoring free agency, because there's too many needs on this team, especially going into this offseason, to just try to focus through the draft, where he's probably only going to hit 30% of those picks or whatever. Hit 10 to 15, and then have a couple good role players, and then everyone else is going to be on a new team or retired within a few years. So can't just rely on the draft. And then I'll round up the Colts pretty quick, because I don't have a whole lot to say positive or negative about them necessarily. The last thing I'd like to see on this team is a tight end, like a really well-rounded tight end. I think that would be great for AR and this offense. Someone that can block a little bit, someone that can catch, someone that's good for Anthony Richardson if he's in a situation where he's running and he's got to dump the ball down, someone that can pick up some rack yards as well. So that's something else I think would be good for the Colts as well. Moving on to the next team in this same tier, we have the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins are a soft team. I've already talked about it in my last video. I think they're a soft team, and they're the perfect definition of what I've talked about a few times in this video. These teams that want all flash, receivers, corners, offensive line, they just focus on tackles. Defensive line, they just focus on edge rushers. They just want the flash. They don't have the meat and potatoes. They have the carrots and the greens, and they have all the sides. They got maybe cornbread. They don't have the meat and potatoes, though. They focus so hardcore on establishing that they're a speed team and they're fast and there's all this speed all over the board, and they forget that football is a physical sport. One of the most physical sports. And it's really gotten to them. And the other thing is, I'm really disappointed in McDaniels. During Tua's injury, he just gave up until Tua got back. He just quit. And they had Skylar Thompson starting. I get that's tough. They bring in Tyler Huntley. That's a Pro Bowl Tyler Huntley, by the way. Bring Tyler Huntley in. And he just has no clue or plan of what to do whatsoever. He was just sad. Like he just looked sad until Tua came back. And a lot of discussion around Tua was, we've been saying with Tua that he's nothing without his receivers. Well, this team is nothing without Tua. I get what you're saying, and I agree with that a little bit. But I'm not going to sit here and act like there was absolutely nothing they could have done, because I watched Matt LaFleur with Malik Willis for a few weeks play really competitive and good football. And he did the opposite of what Mike McDaniels did, which is what I actually think you should do with a backup. I think when you have a backup quarterback, your starter gets hurt, you have a backup quarterback in. I don't think that means you play as basic and balanced and as conservative as you possibly can. That's what Mike McDaniels was trying to do. Matt LaFleur implemented and started running a lot of weird new additions to the offense and new play styles that other teams weren't prepared for, first of all, but also that you could maximize and get the most out of the backup that you had. And Malik Willis is either going to get a contract with the Packers this season as a backup, or he's going to go somewhere else and get a nice contract. He really helped out his own team, and he helped out Malik Willis a lot too. And it really bums me and shocks me that Mike McDaniels couldn't figure out how to get anything going. Like, this is the mastermind offensive guru that just draws stuff up in his sleep, and he couldn't figure out anything those weeks Tua was hurt. Aside from that, Tua's put up a good stat line while he's been healthy. He still isn't clutch against good teams, though. Neither is the whole team. I don't want to just make this a Tua hate piece, but the whole team isn't that good against other good teams. This defense is a mess. This offensive line is a mess. Waddle and Hill have had bad seasons for the most part this year. And I'm scared for this team's future because it's turning darker and bleaker. Especially with the fact that Tua has all the concussion issues that he has, and they gave him a huge contract. He's one concussion away from having to retire. Like, lawfully. I could be wrong about this, so I'll just say I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure the next time Tua has a diagnosed concussion, he will be forced by the NFL to retire. What are the odds that he goes the next 10 years playing in the NFL without getting another concussion? And let's say I am wrong about that and the number's higher. What are the odds that he plays the next 10 years without getting 3 concussions or 2? Every time you get a concussion, it's easier to get another concussion. And he's like at the tip of the iceberg, so that's a factor. I don't know if Tyreek Hill is going to be here next year. Offensive line still a mess. This team's playoff hopes are done for this year, especially with how tough the AFC is. So that's where I stand with the Dolphins right now. Sounded pretty negative, but you don't want to play against them for the most part. I mean, If you have a really strong run game and good at managing, if you're the Steelers or something, I guess you have no problem playing against them, especially at home if it's cold, because the Dolphins will just shrivel up and, do absolutely nothing against a cold weather team. Next up, though, Arizona Cardinals. This was one of my hot teams going into this year. Well, that has looked pretty good at a lot of moments this season. Last few weeks, it hasn't looked amazing. They did just beat the Patriots. They should have done. It's the Patriots, but we've kind of seen an inverse this year in terms of what parts of this team are good and leading the charge and what parts of this team are bad. The Arizona Cardinals started this year, and their defense looked like it was going to be a big problem, but their offense was going to be so explosive that they were going to kind of try to do what the Bengals are doing a little bit, which is just have such an explosive offense that it makes up for your defense. Now, at this point in the season, Jonathan Gannon has the defense rolling, and for the most part, the defense is playing really good ball despite a lackluster roster. But also now at this point in the season, Kyler Murray has been having some disappointing moments for sure. And I've been a Kyler Murray guy. I've been a fan of his. I think he's underrated, but it's just the truth. He's had some disappointing moments the last few weeks. The other thing about this team and the offense, I'm not going to call this guy a bust or anything. I think that's ridiculous, but Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't been exactly what we thought either. He's been playing good. He's been a good receiver. I'm not saying they should bench him. Not saying that they messed up and made the wrong choice, but this is another one of those situations where the expectations were set so high. How could you not be a little disappointed? We were all ready for Marvin Harrison Jr. to come in and take the league over, and that hasn't been the case. Other than that, on to other things with the offense. The offensive line isn't great, but Kyler Murray typically bails that out quite a bit still, despite him having a rough few weeks. James Conner's a legit top 10 running back. Like, legit. He's a good running back. Trey McBride, despite not finding the end zone this season, is a legit top 10 tight end. Michael Wilson, one of my highest, my guy, out of the draft dudes, is playing really good football. So there's still a lot to look forward on offense. They've just had a few disappointing weeks. I'd like to see this team stick with Jonathan Gannon, first of all, but also get an offensive coordinator in the building, a different one, and someone that can get a little bit more out of this roster as a whole, because it does have the opportunity for explosiveness, like crazy explosiveness. And then on the defense, I was saying that, Jonathan Gannon's made this defense look really good. It still has a lot of room to grow roster-wise. He's calling things well. He's obviously had, brought discipline and culture to this defense and an identity. Still got a lot to work on in the offseason, though, with bringing names in. You've had a few rookies come in and play really good corner for them. I think you'd like to see some more pass rushers on this team, edge rushers. I know they brought Baron Browning in, who's been okay. He's been good. Mac Wilson, middle linebacker / edge rusher guy. Love him. He's popped quite a bit this year. And Darius Robinson's had some good moments. And I'm pretty sure I saw this morning that Budda Baker got a contract extension, which is good for them. And they obviously have Jalen Thompson. So there's across the board, there's good pieces on this team. You got to fill out this defense, though. I don't think this offense needs a lot of work roster-wise. If anything, it's more offensive linemen. But I'm still standing by the fact that this is going to be a dangerous team here pretty soon. Their playoff hopes are tough, but I think at this moment it's still possible. It's a list of a few things that need to happen, but yeah, I'm excited to see at least what next year is going to bring for the Cardinals, and they could be very scary if they get a more consistent and established offensive mind in the building as well. Next up in this tier, the Cincinnati Bengals. Defense wins championships, guys. I'm kind of kidding, but I mean, that's the story with the Bengals here, right? You have the number one in passing yards quarterback, number one in receiving yards receiver. You also have the number one in sacks right now, Trey Hendrickson. And what are they, 5-8 right now? I feel like I should look at that to be sure. The Bengals, are 6-8. Playoffs are still going to be extremely tough for them because the division they're in, you got to compete with the Ravens, who beat the Bengals twice already, and the Steelers, who are just have a much better record. They're 10-3 right now, I believe, 10-4. Playoffs are really doubtful. If not doubtful, they're already eliminated. But this is the story of a defense that has held back one of the most prolific offenses that we've seen. Now, here's a couple things I have to say about that, first of all. And I love Joe Burrow. I love not the Bengals. Sorry. I love what the Bengals have kind of going on with Burrow and Chase and what their Super Bowl run. So I don't want to come off as a hater here. I love Joe Burrow. I have issues with the MVP discussion with him, though. Because if you're saying he's the MVP, then you're admitting the MVP is just a stat award. It's not just a stat award. It's a most valuable player. Now, if Joe Burrow ends up sneaking into the playoffs with the Bengals this year and making a little bit of a run, give it to him. 100%. If the Bengals miss the playoffs this year, I can't have this MVP discussion. And I know I'm the one that brought this up, but I've seen a lot of people bring it up. And it makes sense because he's leading stat categories and everything. But I have a few problems with it. First of all, it's MVP, most valuable player. If he's the most valuable player, your team shouldn't have the record it has. If he's so valuable, your team should be able to overcome the defensive struggles they have and the management issues last minute they have because he's so valuable. Now, that sounds like I'm talking shit on Joe Burrow. I'm not, I swear. It's a lot to overcome, and it's ridiculous to ask of him to overcome the things he's overcome. But that is the true sentiment from the MVP award. Most valuable player. You cannot be the most valuable player without at least getting into the playoffs. Now, you can argue that without Joe Burrow, they would be a 3-win team or whatever. Sure. 3-win, missing the playoffs. What's the conversation there? The other thing with the Burrow MVP discussion, he is a really good player, and he's really efficient and moves the chains, moves the ball a lot downfield. He's getting a lot more opportunities to, I don't want to say stat pad necessarily, but to add to his stats because his defense is so bad. He's getting the ball a lot, and he's being put in a position where he has to win the game a lot. And he's putting up fights in those moments. He's putting up those stats that are needed in those moments. I get it. But the facts are the facts. He's on the field a lot. He's throwing it a lot every game. And that is a big reason why his stats are as big as they are. Now let's put Joe Burrow on a more neutral, kind of leveled out team. He's still a top 3 quarterback. He still has a great stat line. His stat line is not as good as it is now, though. I think, and I know that sounds crazy, what I'm saying. It seems like I'm saying is if you put Joe Burrow on a better team that's more evened out and isn't all offense, no defense, that he plays worse. I'm not saying he plays worse. I'm saying his stats level out because he's in an offensive focused team that has to focus on offense. You put him on, I don't know, the Steelers who have an elite defense or whatever. Or not the Steelers with an elite defense because they get the ball back a lot, but Chargers, good defense, solid defense. Play some bend, don't break stuff, you know? Maybe give him another weapon in this scenario or whatever, another receiver. he plays extremely well, probably puts the team in position to win the Super Bowl. I don't know. And then we can have that MVP discussion there. But he's not having the stats that he has. I hope I've made that point. I don't want to drone on about this because this is a talk about the Bengals. The reason I did want to talk about that and bring that up, though, is because I don't know what more you want me to say. Yeah, the defense has been blowing chunks and holding this team back like crazy. And it really was a surprise because you have Lou Anarumo, who was a projected, head coaching candidate a few years ago, or going into this season he was. And then you have Trey Hendrickson, you have Jordan Battle, Von Bell, I'm pretty sure still there, Cam Taylor-Britt, and Hilton. You have a pretty solid core of players that just kind of plummeted. It's not like this team has no talent or whatever. No one expected this. No one expected the Bengals to be bad on defense. They expected it to maybe not be as good, but it's really come out of nowhere in my opinion. It still has a lot of pieces. I am confused on what happened with Anarumo and what happened with those pieces I've mentioned. One thing I do know about the Bengals, they need to start spending big instead of letting good players walk. They have to let players that they draft stay on the team. And the other thing that I think is important is that they're important to talk about is they're in a tough spot with this Jamar Chase contract. They're going to have to pay him more than Justin Jefferson probably. Because I think that's what he's going to demand. And are you going to let him walk? I think there's a really good argument to sign him whatever contract he wants. I also think there's a solid argument to not sign him. Because you've just proven this season that despite how good he is and how awesome he is and how crazy his stat line is and how top tier of a receiver he is, this season's proven that that isn't good enough to win you football games. So I'm not going to sit here and say they shouldn't sign him give Jamar Chase a contract. I do think it's interesting though that people point to his stats and say they're going to have to sign him back because look at his stats and look at how bad this team is. This team needs to sign him, and this is the bright spot they have. Isn't it interesting though that you're saying that? And the issue with this team is they aren't winning games. And he has that stat line still. Wouldn't that kind of be the opposite way of thinking? This is more of just a thought I had that I thought was kind of silly. I 100% think the Bengals should re-sign Jamar Chase. It's just interesting that he's done so much and it hasn't equaled the wins. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Moving on to the next tier. This is going to be the playoff caliber tier. These are teams that are pretty likely, I'm 90% sure they're going to the playoffs. If they don't, weird stuff is happening. I think the perfect team to start this tier is the Chargers. Here's something I think is important to talk about with the Chargers. This season has been a success. It's been a big success. Jim Harbaugh, I always get them mixed up, and my head coach of the Ravens is literally a Harbaugh. Either way, Harbaugh is awesome for this team. He's made it work. Greg Roman, I question that hiring. He's made it work. They took this team back to what I've been preaching in this video a good amount, which is that just going all in on the flashy stuff doesn't make you better. They focused on the run game. They focused on playing efficient football on offense. They focused on building this defense up despite having a lackluster roster. And they've been winning some games out of it. Now, here's the thing. This isn't a team that's going to go shock everyone, get in the playoffs, and tear it up. They just don't have the horsepower to do it. Regardless of that, like I said, the season has still been a success. And Harbaugh's been bringing success to this team despite not having the horsepower. He's been giving wins to this team. The run first, take care of the ball and efficient play, that's what's not only worked best for this team, but that's what's worked best for Herbert. I think this is who Herbert is. Everyone sees, he's got some athleticism. He's got one of the biggest arms in the league, and thinks you got to stick a bunch of receivers around him and have him air it out 40 times a game deep down the field. That's not the kind of quarterback Justin Herbert is. Despite his big arm and everything, that's not who he is. His play style's not run around and make shit happen. It's being efficient and taking care of the football. That's one of the knocks I've kind of had on Herbert in his NFL career. One of the things I've kind of said that's kept him from being in that top 3, top 4, top 5 list and debate is he doesn't always give you everything you'd want for a top 3 guy in big situations. Sometimes he'll dump it down instead of running around outside the pocket and trying to find someone open deep downfield on an important third down conversion. Sometimes he'll just dump it down. But that's the thing. That's who Justin Herbert is, and people don't want to admit that. And I don't want to say don't want to admit that, but are kind of blinded by his arm in seeing what the reality is, which is he doesn't have a need to be throwing Hail Marys every single play. And he doesn't have a need to be on a team that isn't running the football. Run the football, man. Establish a run game. Let him throw it short and medium. Take your shots when they're ready and when it's a good time to do it, because he has the arm to take those deep shots. But Herbert's play style, what fits him best, and what this year has shown me more than anything, where he thrives the most, is this brand of football, this style that the Chargers have achieved this season. A few other important things about this team. McConkey is awesome, Lad McConkey. When the Chargers took Joe Alt with pick 5, and then in the second round got Lad McConkey, it was like a huge sigh of relief. I'm not like a Chargers fan or anything, but I was like, they're going to be okay. And that's kind of proven to be true. McConkey's awesome, man. He's a good receiver, and he got really underrated through the draft process. He can win at basically all 3 levels. Really, really consistent hands. He's a good athlete. He's faster than people think. He's quick more than anything, though. I still think they want a number 1 guy in this room. I don't think Palmer is all that. Quentin Johnson's been a letdown. I'm still holding on hope that he'll be better than he has been. He's been letting Herbert down in a few big moments this year and the team down. I still think there's room to grow in terms of how you use him and how you play him. Use him a little bit more as a run after catch guy and less of a catching it down the field kind of guy, is I think kind of where you went ahead with him. Let him be more of an athlete. There's still a lot of room to grow with this defense, especially on the defensive line. Interior guys, for sure. I think you let Bosa walk this season and lean into Tuli Tuipulotu more. It looks like Khalil Mack's probably going to go too. We'll see how that goes. But he's been playing better. He's actually been playing better than Bosa, even though he's older. So that's where I stand with the Chargers right now. I don't see this team going super far in the playoffs, but I wouldn't necessarily want to play them either. This is a good team, and it's a well-coached team, man. So yeah, a lot to be hopeful for as a Chargers fan, especially going forward, and realize that if you don't get it done in the playoffs this season, realize this was still a big success of a year. And I know it's Super Bowl or nothing with a lot of fans and a lot of people, but you can't have that every year. Definitely not this year, because they do not have the horses to go the distance. Then on to the Buccaneers. I don't have a crazy amount to say about them. Injuries have been a really big hit for this team. The Godwin injury especially, that was a big sting, especially with him having not a breakout season, kind of like a re-emergent season though. He was playing a really top 5 receiver in the league football before he got hurt. So that sucked. Baker's playing really good football, man. I love Baker. Another one of those guys is just one of my favorite players in the league. Love Baker to death. Browns were absolutely idiots for sending him off so they could give a pervert the world, man. This team should win the division and get a playoff spot. And I said that, you don't necessarily want to play the Chargers. That's nothing in comparison. You don't want to play the Buccaneers in the playoffs. They can beat your ass, whoever you are. They maybe won't. There's a good chance that they get beat round 1 or 2 or whatever against a better team. There's a good chance they get in the playoffs and lose to a worse team. But I know this about the Bucs. There's as good a chance as any that they beat the Lions' ass. Or the Eagles, man. On paper, obviously, those two teams I just mentioned are better. But the Buccaneers just have that spirit and that culture about them where if Baker's hot, you get a few lucky plays. Mike Evans is still that dude. This run game gets going. They're going to be tough to beat, man. So I'm really hopeful for what they have going for the rest of the season, heading into the postseason. This defense, I wanted to see a lot more out of this year. It had a lot of really good moments, but like I said, injuries kind of held them back. This team needs a real pass rusher, and I like Diaby, but he's a 2. They really need a pass rusher, though. This offseason that's going to be one of their main focuses is getting an edge rusher. Don't need anyone in the interior on the D-line with Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey, but whether it's a draft or free agency or whatever, get a pass rusher in this building off the edge, and this is going to be a tough team to beat in the future for sure. I'll move on from the Buccaneers with that, and let's talk about the next team here, same tier. Got the Seattle Seahawks. This defense has finally come along in McDonald's system. That was the hope. That was everything that people were expecting from Mike McDonald going to the Seahawks, was that he would turn this defense around, and he very well has. The start of the year, it didn't look like that, and another situation where there's a bunch of injuries they were dealing with, and that played a big hand in them not starting off incredibly strong. But as of right now, this is a really tough defense to keep up with. And you have Byron Murphy up in the middle. That's not something you want to mess with. He'll get up in the quarterback's face. He'll stop the run. Leonard Williams is making plays, getting touchdowns. And then you get some guys like Derek Hall off the edge that's playing well, and Boye Maffe's had a good year. Devin Witherspoon's an absolute animal, and this is no surprise, at least to me. This is no surprise that Devin Witherspoon's a dog, but he is. He's crazy. I love Devin Witherspoon. He's playing awesome for them. Tariq Woolen's been playing better. He's just still so embarrassing as a run defender that I don't know how he hasn't done anything to fix it. He actually got bullied to death by Keon Coleman against the Bills. I don't understand how, as a professional athlete, you can handle getting touched like that by another man and it doesn't drive you insane. And you don't do everything in the offseason to get better at it. He's been bad against run defense and against blocking and with tackling since he got in the league. And he's done nothing really to address it or get better at it. So I don't get it. The amount of clips you can find, he's so easy to push over. And sometimes you see players, you see this more in the NFL than anything else than like college or whatever. I'll use a different position as an example. You'll see some edge rushers that don't want to play run defense and they don't care about it and don't put in a lot of effort and they just want to focus on rushing the passer. Zadarius Smith was one of those guys that would say, I'm getting paid to rush the passer, not play run defense, and I'll take a hit on my contract for that. The thing is, though, with guys like that, they wouldn't let themselves get bullied and pushed around the way Tariq Woolen has. And I know it's a different position I use as an example, but whenever you see guys that do stuff like that, they're not letting themselves get destroyed and beaten up because of something they refuse to do. They're kind of avoiding it. Tariq Woolen's so god-awful at run defense and has just made embarrassing attempts to get better at it. I don't understand it. Enough with that rant, though, because otherwise he's been a really good cover corner. He's still got length. He's still got speed. Next thing I want to talk about, move on to the offense. Geno's a dog. I love Geno Smith for the Seattle Seahawks. He's got a clutch gene in him. I think if you get an offensive line for him, which is one of the main issues for the Seahawks as a whole, as a team, this offense is really dangerous. Geno's more dangerous, and the Seahawks are dangerous. So to me, moving on quick to offseason improvement, what they'll need to do, that's number one to me, is offensive line, and especially interior offensive line. I see no reason to try to move on from Geno Smith, especially because, we see how often quarterbacks nowadays can play past 30 and close to 40 and everything. Not to mention, Geno Smith had quite a few years where he wasn't getting his body beat up. He doesn't look like an old man at all. He doesn't look beat up. He looks good. So keep Geno. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba's totally broken out. He's had a wonderful season. That's been great for them because Tyler Lockett's tenure's probably coming to an end sometime soon, and he'll kind of be that 2 to DK's 1. Which, by the way, I do want to talk about DK a little bit. He should be a lot better. He needs to be more flexible in terms of being able to win at different levels, 1, 2, 3, deep down the field, over the middle, improve on his route running. The other thing is his hands are not as consistent as you want them to be. For someone that's big like him, it's just not as good as you want it to be. So that's a little disappointing, but still DK's your guy. He's still, for the most part, the number one receiver. The other thing on offense I wanted to mention was Zach Charbonnet with Kenneth Walker being injured a little bit. Zach Charbonnet's been starting and playing, and he looks really good. Like, if you didn't have Kenneth Walker and that was your starting running back, I wouldn't be sitting here saying you got to address the running back room at all. Maybe get a second guy behind Charbonnet as a change of pace kind of guy, but no need to look for another running back if he is your starting back. That's a good running back. He's improved, too. It's not just who he is. He's running harder. He's running a lot more determination. I like Zach Charbonnet a lot. So, address O-line in the offseason. This is a team that you got to bring your A game against in the playoffs and in the postseason and whatnot. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the Seahawks. And then next up, Washington Commanders. I can pretty obviously say this is one of the biggest shocks of the season. One of the biggest surprises. From the roster perspective and who they brought in as coaches and just historically, was not expecting this at all. Now this is where the conversation starts. Jaden Daniels, this year's CJ Stroud, right? He's been awesome. He's been fantastic. Here's something I do want to say about my take in comparison to him. My take before he got drafted going into this year is I felt as if people had this idea with Jaden Daniels that he was this kind of raw prospect that was going to take some time to get going, kind of like Anthony Richardson, but he had a bunch of upside. I thought he had a bunch of upside, but I thought he was going to hit the ground running pretty quick because you have to remember this was someone that had 5 years in college football, was coming in the league at 23, 24 years old, a lot of experience. I didn't see him struggling early on necessarily, struggling as much as anyone. But the level he's played at has been more than I thought he was going to for his first few seasons overall. He's so good at taking care of the football. And he's so good at the little things of being a quarterback that take a lot of time and a lot of experience to learn. He's good at those things right now. And then you look at his draft profile, and it's like, can hit really accurate deep shots downfield. That translated. Really good athlete, escaping out of the pocket, escaping out of sacks, can make throws on the run. That translated to the NFL. And then the one thing we were worried about translating to the NFL is being able to hit shots over the middle, not being able to see over the middle and be accurate over the middle, because he rarely did that in LSU. That didn't translate because that's a non-factor. He's fine at that, just as much as anything else. Maybe it's not his strongest point is being able to hit things over the middle, but you don't watch Jaden Daniels' film today and say that's a huge weakness. That's a big problem for him. So that's been a total hit for the Commanders. Now, the other thing that I think is important to talk about is this coaching staff. Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury. When I look at some of these other teams that have these defensive-minded coaches, or maybe a head coach that's an offensive guy that doesn't need to be a head coach, just needs to be an offensive guy. Arthur Smith, good example. You can accommodate having either of those things if you have two really good coaches that are really good at what they do. You have one coach that knows defense, and you have another coach that knows offense. Now, that feels pretty obvious and simple. It's not easy in the NFL to find that exact mixture, but I'll tell you what's a lot more difficult is finding a blue chip A-plus head coach. It's probably easier finding a well-established, culture-focused, defensive-minded head coach like Dan Quinn, and then finding a solid offensive guru like Cliff Kingsbury, like the Commanders have done. That seems easier to me than finding, 2000s Bill Belichick on the side of the road. This is a strategy I'd like to see a lot more teams implement, because I look at some of the coaches getting fired and that are candidates for this season or whatever. And a lot of my worries go away with them when I see them being paired up with someone that complements their skill set. Let's take someone like Mike Vrabel. I'd like to see him be a head coach somewhere else. I think he'd prosper as a head coach. One thing that worries me about Mike Vrabel is his offensive mind. Not a whole lot to look forward to there. Get someone like Joe Brady. You're not going to get him to be an offensive coordinator, but I don't know, Arthur Smith or something to pair with him. We're cooking. We're rocking. I mean, Arthur Smith, Mike Tomlin, great examples there. Arthur Smith showed he's not really a head coach kind of guy, but he's a good offensive mind. Mike Tomlin is a very well-established head coach that's defensive-minded. These two together, and I'll talk about the Steelers in a little bit later, those two together are the reason why the Steelers have been doing as good as they are. So that's just something I found interesting from this season and for this team, for the Commanders, is having two complementary coaches that are good is pretty similar to having one head coach like a Kyle Shanahan who's elite. And it's a little easier to find also. I will also say for the Commanders, roster still has a lot of work. It still does, which it almost makes me more hopeful for them that they have a lot of room to grow over the next few years. This O-line still needs work. They want another weapon to complement Terry. Diami Brown hasn't really been getting it done this year. Someone that can win underneath really efficiently and has good feet and route running would be nice compliment on this team for sure. A Jerry Jeudy type, not Jerry Jeudy because he's in Cleveland and probably not leaving, but a Jerry Jeudy type, or Deontay Johnson, who is on the Ravens and doesn't really have a home because they aren't using him. That would be nice to add. And then on defense, needs a lot of refining, need more pass rushers on the outside because they have three pretty solid nose tackles, or defensive tackles, which kind of brings me to another point. I think they should consider shopping Jonathan Allen this offseason. He's kind of, I wouldn't say fallen off a cliff, but he's been digressing. And they drafted Jerjon Newton, and they have Daron Payne. So those spots are fine. They still need an edge rusher, though. Those are some of the things I think that the Commanders will have to do looking forward. And then I do want to discuss what can the Commanders do if they do get in the playoffs. It looks like they will. What are we looking at? Well, it depends on seeding and matchups, but this is a team that's been playing a lot of games really close to the neck this year. I think this team reminds me so much of last year's Texans, like so much. I think we could see something similar like that, where if the Commanders run into, let me take a look here. They run into a team like, I don't know, the Rams in the playoffs, or the Seahawks, maybe the Bucks. If they run into a team like that in the playoffs, they could sneak out a win, like a surprise win. Other than that, I struggle to see a big playoff run come out of them. On to the next team in this tier, we have the Texans, who I was just talking about and comparing with the Commanders. But the Texans, I had higher hopes for going into the season. I had CJ Stroud as my MVP candidate going into the season. There we go. Maybe MVP candidate isn't the right word, but prediction. That's who I thought was going to get MVP. That's not the case this year. I do want to start this off by talking about CJ, though. I don't think CJ is having a sophomore slump. I think this team has had a lot of other struggles that's led to their losses and some of the times he's had poor play. Now, CJ hasn't been perfect. I'm not saying he's a god and has made zero mistakes and everyone else is at fault. He's made mistakes this year. I cannot sit here and believe that he's having a genuine sophomore slump or whatever, though. You look at the offensive line, you look at the fact that a lot of these playmakers like Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins have been hurt a lot of the season. And I'll just re-emphasize the offensive line, which has been horrible. CJ Stroud has been having anything more than a sophomore slump in terms of positive and playing better than a sophomore slump. He's playing above a worse situation at times this year than he did last year. And I just can't buy into the sophomore slump thing with all the other issues they've had going. Not to mention the fact that the defense has had great moments this year. It's also been really inconsistent. And it's led up a lot of points to a few teams like against the Titans. That game was bad. And it wasn't on CJ. Now, that interception he had towards the end of the game, that was on CJ. Yeah, he had a bad interception in that game for sure. He had a couple. But what about the rest of the time? What about the other points that the defense just let up? So I'm not going to sit here and say there's a sophomore slump, but I will reemphasize O-line has been a problem for them this year. I do want to say, despite the injury, Nico Collins is an animal. I love Nico Collins. This is someone I've liked since he was at Michigan. I don't want to hop on this and just say, like, I was right because, I wasn't even making content at the time, so there's no verification for that, but I'd still like to say it and acknowledge I've been a big fan of his and thought he was going to be better than what he's been doing since before CJ got there, and here he is, one of the higher paid receivers in the league, and one of the best receivers in the league right now, so love what's going on for him. And then since I did just bring up an irrelevant point about a take I had, 4 or 5 years ago, Joe Mixon proved me wrong. I thought Joe Mixon was a bad signing for the Texans. Not bad necessarily. I just thought he wasn't going to have much of an impact and that there were other places they could have looked for running back. I thought he was kind of washed. Not necessarily washed, but just I thought he was digressing. Well, here he is, being one of the best running backs in the league and adding so much to the culture of this team as well. Adding so much energy, becoming a captain too, and everything. He's been played a huge effect on this team this season. So Joe Mixon definitely proved me wrong. And then, on to some things they'll have to improve on this season. Like I said, offensive line needs almost a complete revamp except for Laramie Tunsil. And then on defense, I think they would really benefit from bringing in a defensive tackle to complement everything else that they have. Someone kind of like Jonathan Allen, who I mentioned that the Commanders should consider shopping. So, just a thought I had there that I thought would be interesting. And they also want to fix up this linebacking core a bit because it's kind of weak. So, in terms of the playoff picture for the Texans, this is a team that, as long as you have a coach like DeMeco Ryans, you have a quarterback like CJ Stroud, you have a receiving core like Nico and Tank Dell, you have pass rushers like Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. This team could do anything in the playoffs. I don't think there's a reason this team isn't in my Super Bowl caliber tier or Super Bowl contender. They're in my playoff which one are they in? They're in my playoff caliber tier. There's a reason they're not in the next tier, but this is a tough outing in the playoffs for sure with this team. Especially when you get towards playoff time, because I feel like this is the kind of team right here that cleans up a lot of the issues they have. They clean up a lot of the issues they have late season when it matters most and can get the job done. So I still have high hopes for the Texans. I don't think they're first round outs. It obviously depends on who they play and everything and just luck and how they show up. But that's just what I'm thinking. They're not going to be first round outs. On to the next team, Los Angeles Rams. I love this team. I love Matthew Stafford. Now, they had a really rough start to this season, but they had a complete rebound. And at this point, there's a very good chance they're going to win their division. Matthew Stafford has been one of the most underrated quarterbacks and players I've ever seen in my lifetime. And this guy at this point right now is legit playing like a top 5 quarterback most of the time. Now, obviously not every single game. And when you look at the fact that they have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua and Sean McVay as a head coach, that adds to his success, obviously. But he does so many things well. And he's so smart and cerebral and just understands the game. I'd love to see him play another season or two. And here's the thing that comes with that. I think the Rams are going to be a team that wants to Jordan Love. Not saying they want to trade for Jordan Love or anything. I'm saying they want to do a Jordan Love situation. They want to draft a quarterback or get a really young quarterback, sit him behind Matthew Stafford for a year or two, and let him develop, and then just plug him in. And I wanted to talk about this first just because I thought it was interesting. And like I said, I love Stafford and what the Rams have going on right now. So I think it would be really interesting because I was worried that Stafford was going to retire after this year, kind of no matter what. I think there's a good chance he plays again. I think there's a good chance he plays another year. If he does hang around for another year, I think getting Dylan Gabriel or Quinn Ewers in the draft would be awesome because they're not going to have like a top 5 to 10 pick where they can get Shador or Cam or whatever. I think getting Dylan Gabriel or Quinn Ewers would be interesting. That would be really interesting. And then if they got someone like Jalen Milroe, I don't think he's a super solid fit for what McVay wants to do. But I think he would be adaptable to it anyways. Regardless, that was just, I'd say, an interesting conversation to have. Maybe they trade for someone like a Trey Lance or something. Or a Zach Wilson. Or I was going to say, one thought I had earlier this year when everything went to hell with the Panthers was I would have loved to see Bryce Young go to the Rams, but I think the Panthers are gonna keep Bryce Young. But if they don't, I'd love to see Bryce Young go to the Rams. Moving on from that, I did need to acknowledge Jared Verse being an awesome player, probably going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's been phenomenal. I think the main question with him going into the NFL is his power going to translate to the next level? And it has. He's fantastic at bullying tackles, so that's great. Another thing that's been great for the Rams is when their receiving core is healthy, they're very dangerous. Kyren Williams is slowly becoming, or not even slowly, but kind of is becoming an elite running back. We got to start acknowledging this guy as being that dude. He's really stepped it up this year too. He's gone up another level from his last couple seasons. So all in all, I think the Rams are another one of those teams that, dang, you don't want to play him. You don't want to play him in the playoffs. And look at the Bills, man. That was like the surefire number 1 team in the league, and they went to town with them on offense, just in a complete shootout, and they came out on top, dude. They needed that win, and this is a team when if they got their pieces healthy, this is a really tough outing for just about anyone. Seriously, Matthew Stafford at a high level, Puka Nacua is an insanely talented and good receiver, so That's where I stand with the Rams right now. Now we are on to the last couple teams in this tier. Moving on to the Broncos as my next team here. I think a few main stories of the Broncos. Let me start with my expectations for this team going into this season, because I liked where my stance was with the Broncos and with Bo Nix. Coming off of a rough game, had a few picks against the Colts, but I was saying that before the draft even happened, I thought the Broncos were going to take Bo Nix, and then he was going to be fine. He was going to be good. And then they took Bo Nix, and then they've been fine with him. They've been good. My expectations for the Broncos as a whole was not quite what it is now. I was thinking a few steps lower than this. But here's where I was a little bit wrong about this and forgot. Sean Payton needs his respect. And we all forgot what kind of a coach Sean Payton was over the last few years and forgot what he could do. Here's what he can do. He can take a team like the Broncos, who went under what some say, me included, was the worst trade in NFL history in getting Russell Wilson. One of, at least. In one of the worst situations that a team could be in. And he has turned them into a serious playoff contender. This defense is totally turned around. And that's not just him, that's DC as well. But he plays a large part in the defense playing a lot better, which it has been. This has been one of the better defenses in the league, is the Broncos defense. And on offense, he took a quarterback like Bo Nix, who plays his style of quarterback. Safe, quick, take care of the ball, and don't mess up a whole bunch. Now, like I said, he's had a few moments this season where he's thrown a few picks. His stat line isn't amazing, but keep in mind we are talking about a rookie here with Bo Nix. But he's still efficient. He's still accurate. He still gets the ball out quick. I think he's going to clean the picks up, especially as we get into the latter end of the season, into the postseason. And they're in a really good spot right now. It reminds me a little bit of the Chargers. I just think the Broncos have a little bit more fuel, especially on defense, to compete in the latter end of the season. But it does remind me a little bit of Harbaugh and the Chargers. The Broncos have a lot of things figured out here, guys. I mean, you may think I'm putting him way too high here, but they have, yes, a rookie quarterback, but a rookie quarterback with a ton of experience, a ton of collegiate experience. He's taken his lumps at the start of the season, and they've taken some L's because of Bo Nix not being able to play to a super high level this year at the start of the season. He's worked past that, and he's at a much better spot than he was at the start of the year. And aside from Bo Nix, this offense and this team as a whole has their style of football figured out. So while I'm not thinking this Broncos team is necessarily, going into the next tier of heavy Super Bowl contenders, this is a really good team. And again, when you look at the defense, they've got Nick Bonito, who's a legit Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He was my Defensive Player of the Year pick a couple weeks ago on the Pocket Passers YouTube channel. We did an awards prediction with that. Go check that out. But he's legit, and he's winning with being a good pass rusher and also being versatile and getting pick sixes and interceptions, turning the ball over. Other than that, you have Zach Allen, who's been one of the highest graded defensive tackles of the season. Just been phenomenal. You got a cornerback room with Patrick Surtain, who at this moment is the best cornerback in the league. You have Riley Moss, who's playing really well as long as he gets back healthy. Jaquan McMillan, who's fantastic as a slot guy. And this defense just has things figured out. And then, we'll take it back to the offense here. Courtland Sutton's playing great. The running back room, now I will say, I've been disappointed with Javonte Williams, especially coming from what I saw with him entering the draft and entering the pros. I've been disappointed with that. But they still have a strong run game because they have a really strong offensive line, and they're playing this hot hand with 3 really good running backs. Whether it is Jaleel McLaughlin or it is Audric Estime, they've got a running back. And if Javonte Williams wants to start playing a little bit better, he'll get the ball a bit more, and that'll be fine. If he's earning that role, that means nothing wrong with him playing either. This team has things they'll have to improve on in the offseason for sure. They're not there yet. They're not ready to win a Super Bowl or anything like that. But going from this year with what they've done based off what happened at the start of the year and what happened last year, huge improvements across the board. I've been so impressed with the Broncos. And like I said at the start of this, when talking about the Broncos, Sean Payton needs his respect for this. We need to give Sean Payton his respect for this. We kind of saw him enter into the Broncos and have a little bit of that old school hard ass mentality and kind of, shake our heads at it and be like, it's a new game, man. You're too old for this. Well, here he is playing his game, and he's clearly he's different, and he's adjusted his style and what he does a little bit for this team. Obviously, you have to if you're going to have any success. But he's still Sean Payton, and he's still one of the best head coaches in the league right now. So one of the best things that the Broncos did recently was trade for Sean Payton. And that's really made them a real contender here. Now, again, a lot of this conversation goes back to Bo Nix playing as well as he has. I don't see Bo Nix playing this well without Sean Payton as a head coach to kind of balance him out and help with his development. Even though Sean Payton isn't the most offensive-minded, offensive guru quarterback guy in the world, he's played this development game wonderfully with Bo Nix here. So I heard a lot of sentiments around the Broncos going into the season that some people thought it was a bad idea for them to take him because he's in a division with Patrick Mahomes and they didn't see him competing, which was just a dumb take to me because what are you going to do, not have a quarterback just because you're always going to be comparing them to Patrick Mahomes? That's ridiculous to me. And regardless of that, I think a lot of people are wrong about the kind of quarterback Bo Nix is. Because, yeah, I did mention he can get the ball out quick and he's efficient and takes care of the football most of the time on his best days. Probably in the future, we'll see a little bit more of that. But one thing we're realizing about him, too, is you need him to scramble and play some backyard football, run around and make plays happen. He'll do that, too, dude. He'll do that, too. He was at Auburn doing all that. He can still tap into that. And he's done that a few times this season. So it's tough to really bet on a rookie quarterback going into the postseason. But this is one of those guys you're not too afraid to bet on because he's got this quarterback position thing figured out. Some of the things they'll have to work on. I've mentioned a few times teams needing tight ends. I don't know what that is about me, but sometimes I see a room that doesn't have that guy at tight end, and I watch what the Lions are doing with their tight end, and watching what the Cardinals are doing with McBride, and watching all these tight ends succeed. I think Bo Nix is the guy that needs a tight end. Not needs a tight end to succeed, but I think they're going to get a lot out of their offense if they get a really good tight end in the building. So that's something I'd like them to see them do in the offseason. And they need another receiver to complement Sutton for sure. Aside from that, I like their running back room. You can add a true one in there if you really need to, but I don't mind what they're doing with the hot hand thing. They've got 3 guys that you can do that with that all kind of bring something different to the table, so keep that rolling for sure. And in terms of the future this season and going into the postseason with the Broncos, team's nasty. Defense is nasty. Bo Nix, although he's a rookie, don't think it's going to be an easy out with him at all. And on to the last team in this tier. This is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this tier is playoff caliber. The next tier is Super Bowl contender. I had the Steelers in the next tier above this one a week ago. Or a week and a half ago or whatever. Before they played the Eagles, I had them in the Super Bowl contender tier. I moved them down to this tier at the end, so they're still ranked in just about the same spot, but I moved them down to this tier after the Eagles' loss. Now, here's the thing. Was the Eagles' loss on paper such a big deal to them that it messed with their playoff chances? As far as I know, they're basically almost locks for the playoffs. They're almost clinched. Was it a big deal that they lost to the Eagles? No. Was it a big deal that they lost to the Eagles because we're no longer talking about a borderline playoff team that sneaks in the wild card, blah, 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 and we're now talking about Super Bowl hopes team in the Steelers? Yeah, it is a disappointment that they lost to the Eagles. But not just that they lost, how they lost. It wasn't as competitive as you'd want it to be. I wanted that game to be a lot more competitive. And it wasn't a horrible game. They didn't get the snot beat out of them necessarily. George Pickens was out. That's tough. I didn't see the competitive nature I wanted to see to keep him in the Super Bowl contender tier, though. I don't know if they really go toe-to-toe with the Steelers or with the Eagles or the Bills or whatever in the playoffs and have a good shot of winning it. I don't know that I do. I don't want that to put away all the good that they've done this season because they beat the allegations, the 9-8 allegations, haven't they? And they have a quarterback now. And they have a better offensive play caller as well with Arthur Smith. So, and by the way, Arthur Smith, like I mentioned him earlier, he got a lot of hate for what he did in Atlanta as head coach. He is, to me, one of those guys that isn't a head coach, just doesn't have that built in him. But he is still a good offensive play caller. He's still a good offensive coordinator in general. So I thought it was smart bringing him in. On to some other things that the Steelers have done good this season. Their rookie class is phenomenal. They fully addressed their offensive line. That's been fantastic for them. Adding Nick Herbig as an edge rusher was just unfair. Already having Highsmith and TJ Watt and then add him in. That's crazy. Peyton Wilson's been playing really well. Joey Porter Jr., he's not a rookie, but from last year, he's been playing really well too. So this team has a lot to lean on, and Mike Tomlin's just a crazy good coach. It does have a lot to lean on, so I don't want to make this all negative. The other thing I want to talk about here that's positive, Russ rebounding and playing really great for this team. He's added a level to this offense, a level of play to this offense that they needed. He can get the ball downfield. We forgot who was, in the 2010s and early 2020s, who was the best deep ball thrower in the league? Russell Wilson, man. All the way up until Seattle. Since before he left Seattle, he was the best deep ball thrower. And we saw him on the Broncos, and, I was one of the people that said he's washed. He isn't washed. He was in the wrong system, playing the wrong game on the wrong team. Now, he's got a better cast around him. He's got play calling that matches him better. He's got a team that doesn't need to just focus on him to win the game and make big plays all the time. They have a run game. They have a defense that'll get the ball back. They have a kicker that'll kick it from, 68 yards out and get points on the board. So it isn't just the Russ show, and it doesn't have to be the Russ show. His moon ball has added an extra layer to this offense, but he's just a piece of the entire thing that they have going, which has been fantastic for him. Just being a piece, just a cog on the machine, not the whole machine. I do want to talk one more little teensy bit about the playoff standings, and I bring up this Eagles game again. The Eagles are a tough team to judge how other teams do against them. It's not entirely fair. It's one of the best rosters in the league, and it's really tough to beat them. And it's really tough to stay entirely competitive with them. But here's the thing. We're talking about a team that hasn't proven in a long time that they can keep up with those kinds of teams like the Eagles. And seeing them struggle that way against the Eagles man, you needed to see a little bit more competitive out of them for them to get to the next tier. With that being said, I see no reason why the Steelers can't make a deep run in the playoffs. I'm not confident enough to make the take that they will right now, and I'm kind of basing that off the Eagles thing. So that's more of a personal thing with me. So that's the Steelers. Now we are moving on to our next tier of teams. These are our Super Bowl contenders. Teams that very well could make a deep run in the playoffs, get to the Super Bowl, have a margin of error not as big as the other teams. That you also have to be able to beat these teams if you want to get past them. First up on the list is the Packers. Now, the Packers are one of the most fun teams in the league right now, in my opinion. I love Jordan Love and what he's doing. And I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about Mike McDaniels. Matt LaFleur is one of the top coaches in the entire league. And I'll say again, what he did with Malik Willis while Jordan Love was out kind of proved that, man. He didn't just back down with his quarterback going out. He figured it out and got past it. And that was awesome to see. The problem with the Packers going early in the season was their defense was playing pretty poor, especially their pass rushing unit. At this point in the season now, their defense is one of their strongest aspects, and you can contribute that to Xavier McKinney. You can contribute that to some of the pass rushers that were struggling earlier. They're playing good run defense now. The overall coverage unit that their DC has brought, Jeff Hafley has brought, has been much better. I'd still like to see a more thorough cornerback room for the Packers to make a real run in the playoffs. Regardless, though, the defense really solid. Now, moving back to the offense, Jordan Love's that guy. The thing I've talked about Jordan Love a few different times. Jordan Love is one of those guys. He kind of has that Brett Favre and a little Aaron Rodgers in him, where he's going to sling it. He's going to sling it around. He's going to throw a couple of interceptions. But Jordan Love turning the ball over against basically anyone isn't the end of the game, because he's probably going to throw a crazy 68-yard bomb the next time he's on the field. Or he's going to be able to move the ball down the field and get an efficient punch in the end zone, right? And when you look at this receiving core, you've got like four different, maybe there isn't a true like number one guy on this receiving core, but there's a bunch of really, really solid, good number twos on this team. And Jaden Reed's kind of stepped up as that main guy. I love Jaden Reed as well. Moving on to the tight ends, I've been really disappointed in Luke Musgrave. That was someone I thought was going to be a lot better. He reminded me a little bit of Mark Andrews. Not that I thought he was going to play as good as Mark Andrews, just play style-wise, I thought he was going to be kind of similar. And he's been kind of a letdown this season and has actively held the team back a few times. And it's good that they've kind of moved more to Tucker Kraft, who has surprised me and has actually been a really good tight end for them. I think he could very well be their tight end one. Moving forward going in the next few seasons, they don't have to try to draft someone or make a big move for him. He's playing good enough tight end. That's their guy. The offensive line, one of the better offensive lines in the league. Then I didn't even touch on Josh Jacobs yet, who's added an extra layer to this offense and to this team that brings a consistency factor of being able to hand it off to him, get your 4 to 5 yards each time. Every time he touches the ball, he's one of the most consistent at getting 4 yards every time he touches the ball is Josh Jacobs when it comes to running backs. So this team there's a reason they're in this tier right here and why they're Super Bowl contenders. This team has a lot to look forward to going into the postseason here. They could beat anyone. They really could. So I love what the Packers are doing. I think this is a good spot for them right here. On to the next team, the Baltimore Ravens. Just coming off a win against the New York Giants, the 32nd ranked team in the league, so it's tough to pay too much attention to that. Lamar Jackson has a little bit of an MVP candidacy going. The defense has really held this team back a lot this season. This is somewhat of a similar story to what we've seen with the Bengals. Now, here's one of the main differences with the Ravens and Bengals. It's a lot more easy for me to point out where the issues on the Ravens are in comparison to the Bengals. And that's because I think it's a few guys that are blowing some coverages for the Ravens and making it more difficult to not let that happen rather than just team or, defensive team failure. Brandon Stevens should have been cut week 4. I cannot believe the Ravens have gone this long letting someone basically lose them multiple games. I assure you, there is some other third or fourth string cornerback on their roster in free agency that would not be as much of a detriment to this defense as Brandon Stevens. Other than that, Marcus Williams, he's a big problem. His first year with the Ravens, he was really good. After that, he's been a letdown. This has been a big problem for the Ravens. Defensive line, pass rushing unit, been dealing with some injuries there. Michael Pierce has been out a little bit. Nnamdi Madubuike has taken a little step down since last year, I'd say. He's kind of picked his play up a little bit as the year's gone on, but I was worried that contract that the Ravens gave him wouldn't quite be worth it, and I don't feel less sure about it. And then you look over at the edge group, Odafe Oweh, okay, hasn't had that big breakout yet. I don't think he's going to. I think he's kind of capped out at a solid B player, B- to B+ or something like that. Kyle Van Noy is another guy there that's, he's older, he's still playing good football, but nothing special out of that group. So the defense isn't as amazing as it could be. Let's take a look at some of the other bright spots. You still have Roquan. Trenton Simpson's playing good football for a linebacker, or second-year linebacker. Marlon Humphrey's having one of his best seasons in a few years. Nate Wiggins has been one of the better rookie cornerbacks in the league. So there's still a lot to look forward here. The big issue with the Ravens has been letting up those really big, deep plays. Because in general, you'll see the Ravens get into a lot of third down situations with teams where they have the upper hand and then just let something slip deep, which is a positive and a negative when it comes to postseason success. Because they could just be on. They could click and be on. And the defense is letting up half as much as they were letting up in the regular season. Especially with teams like this that are well coached and well prepared for the postseason and the playoffs. Sometimes they just turn it on and get right. The other side of that coin is it could go the exact opposite way and it could get even worse, or it could just stay the same. And that scares me a little bit. But regardless of that, we've seen the Ravens be able to succeed and win with just their offense. Lamar Jackson, like I said, MVP candidacy. Derrick Henry was a fantastic signing for this team. Zay Flowers is breaking out as a true wide receiver 1. Mark Andrews, despite starting the year off weak and not getting involved, has kind of gotten back to regular form. He looks like Mark Andrews again. And Isaiah Likely, when he's healthy, he's a really solid number 2. This offensive line, it's young. I think I talked about him, discussed him a bit earlier, but you got Roger Rosengarten on a right tackle who's undersized and has had some bad moments, but has had more good moments and has impressed more than anything. Daniel Falele, inconsistent, big guy. Tyler Linderbaum, one of the better centers in the entire league. Ronnie Stanley has had one of his best seasons in the last 3 or so years. He's kind of declined a little bit recently, but this season he's picked it back up. And then Patrick McCarry has had a lot of penalties. But other than that, he's been consistent. Here's some of my issues with the offense, though. It felt like we figured out what the Ravens wanted to do, which is run the football, make that the first priority, focus on that, being able to run the football, and be able to control the clock and control the game that way. and then allow for big explosive plays to happen with Lamar and Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, whoever. But when I look at the Eagles game, the Eagles versus Ravens, there were some really cross play calling decisions that rubbed me the wrong way. I don't understand why on so many occasions it will be 1st and 10 and Lamar, either it's Lamar or Todd Monken who's calling the plays. It's 1st and 10. There's plenty of time left in the game. Maybe we're playing down. And 1st and 10, just going to sling it down the field 50 yards for an incompletion. And then 2nd and 10, sling it down the field 30 yards for an incompletion. As if there's 5 seconds left in the game and we have to score or nothing. I don't get it. I don't understand that. That's one of the things that's concerning me most about the Ravens offense going into the postseason, is they're going to fall behind and then forget what makes them good. And I'll use that Eagles-Ravens game as an example again. The Eagles-Ravens game, there was a point where it was about 10 minutes left. The Ravens were down by like 9-ish minutes, or were down by 9 points. Lamar gets the ball. The Ravens get the ball on offense, and what I just told you about slinging it down the field on 1st and 10 happened. And they lost a drive because of it and had to punt it away immediately and went 3 and out. And it's like this team is built to run the football. It's built to pass short. It's built to get rack yards with, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. It's built to allow for Lamar Jackson to roll out and make plays with his legs. It's built for him to roll out and make plays while rolling out, passing down the field. And sometimes this team forgets what it's good at. And this is the same thing that happened against the Chiefs last year in the AFC Championship. Refusing to run the ball against a not-so-great run defense when you are the best run offense in the league. So I know there's going to be issues that people have with me putting the Ravens here and putting them over the Steelers and everything I said about the Steelers. Here's the difference. Here's why I'm putting the Ravens in this tier after they both lost to the Eagles with pretty similar scores off the top of my head. I don't see the Steelers having that same ability to win the game that they had against the Eagles. To me, it was another one of those situations where they ran out of gas. With the Ravens, it just felt like they were pushing the wrong buttons. But they had the buttons to push. They could have pushed the correct buttons. So as good as Todd Monken's been this year, a lot of strange questions with his play calling. And you can mark some of it up to Lamar. I'm not going to get upset at that. I don't think it all is, but a lot of weird decisions. And then here's the other thing I want to say about the Ravens really quick before we move on. I was so upset by the Deontay Johnson trade when it happened because I saw no room for him to play on this team. You had Zay Flowers going. You had Rashad Bateman going. You have Nelson Aguilar as the third at receiver. You have Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson can throw it, and he can run it quite a bit. He only throws it about 25 times a game anyways. And you're handing the ball off to Derrick Henry and Justice Hill quite a bit. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely also here. I saw absolutely no room for Deontay Johnson to fit on this offense, and I saw multiple issues on the defense. I did not understand that, and now they've had to suspend Deontay Johnson for refusing to play, and he refused to play because he wasn't getting enough snaps, and it hasn't been working out because they can't find a role for him, and it's a total mess, and I just didn't understand that one bit. So that's my feelings on that. That was a complete waste of a trade. We'll see if it helps out in the postseason. Maybe Deontay Johnson in the postseason in revenge has 200 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and helps them win the game. But just another thing that was a negative on them. But here's the deal. I haven't spent enough time talking about this. The Ravens have the potential and the ability, like I mentioned, they have those buttons, have the potential and ability to be the most prolific, best offense in the league right now. Because they've shown on multiple occasions, if it needs to be running Derrick Henry down your throat and read option with Lamar and bubble screens to Zay, they can do that. But if they get in a situation, they've also shown this, where Lamar can play drop back quarterback, can play Tom Brady type of quarterback, can run around and extend plays and throw it deep down the field and win that way and put up points on the board quick. They're so good at managing the clock and so good at just managing the entire flow of the game. So that's why I think the Ravens should still be in this tier and are, as I see them, as good as they are. They have the ability to. I'd like to see them implement it more. I hope they learn from their mistakes over the last few postseasons. And on to the last team in this tier, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs have one of the best records and have one of the closest point differentials in the league. Now, I feel like everyone knows this. The Chiefs have been winning games using dark magic. They've been winning football games because they each sold their soul to the football devil, and he granted them the ability to win really close football games that they shouldn't win at the cost of having to listen to horrible Taylor Swift music. Here's the thing about the Chiefs, and here's the thing about Patrick Mahomes. They aren't the best at anything, and neither is Mahomes. But both the Chiefs and Mahomes have mastered two things, and I've said this before. They both mastered the ability to win football games. That is what Mahomes does best, is win football games. Now, I want you to think and tell me in your brain telepathically, what was Tom Brady's absolute best trait? I'm waiting. His best trait is what Patrick Mahomes is, which is winning football games. That is a trait that they have both mastered. Everyone's going to talk about the refs. Everyone wants to talk about these play calls and all the refs have done to help them and everything. I get it. There's been some weird play call or some weird calls from the refs. Not as many as you think. It's not as many as you think. And when you look at the situation that the Chiefs constantly put themselves in, while it isn't ideal that they're not, winning games convincingly, they're always putting themselves in position to win football games. So of course you're going to notice bad play calls. My point about the refs isn't as much that they're cheating for the Chiefs. It's just that the refs have been bad recently within the last few years. I don't think it's as much about the Chiefs. And I'm going to get hate for that, but whatever. I heard the same thing for New England and Tom Brady as long as I was alive. And now all anyone can say about Tom Brady is he's the GOAT and he's the best of all time. So this is just what happens when you win and succeed. Let's move to some of the specific things about the Chiefs. Offensive line's fantastic. Here's one thing that gets wrong about Patrick Mahomes for this season. People seem to forget this. Receiving core is bad. Now, they did add DeAndre Hopkins, but you got to keep in mind, Marquise Brown got injured. And the other receiver they were relying on is Xavier Worthy, a rookie. Other than that, Juju Smith-Schuster and, Travis Kelce, who age has hit him hard. He's not playing nearly as well as he was in the past. Isaiah Pacheco's been injured, which has messed with the run game. This offense, everyone keeps pointing at Mahomes' stats and all he's done, and the fact that, his stat line isn't very good and his touchdown interception ratios, this and that. Well, first of all, like I said, his best trait is winning football games, which he's been doing. And second, don't have the run game. Receiving core has spent most of this year being well below average, and he's done the most important thing, which is win football games. So you can hate him all you want. You can point out his stats all you want. I don't think he cares very much that his stats aren't good as long as he's winning football games. Back onto the defense, though. Defense is as good as ever. Them having Leo Chanel, Nick Bolton as linebackers, and that being like the least important position on defense, is really indicative of the entirety of this defense, because you look across the board at the cornerback room, the D-line, the pass rushers they have on the edge, and Chris Jones on the interior, Justin Reed at safety. Just everything on defense is fantastic. And then Steve Spagnuolo is one of probably the best defensive coordinator right now. It's him or Brian Flores. Maybe Aaron Glenn's in there. So while everyone's so concerned about calling the Chiefs frauds and pointing at Mahomes' stats and laughing at him and the refs helping them and everything, I'm concerned that people are going to get so caught up in that while I do have the Chiefs only in Super Bowl contender tier and not in the next one, I'm concerned people are going to pay so much attention to all that while we're not paying attention, the Chiefs are just going to swoop in and win this whole thing again in three-peat. And that has not left my mind one bit. I don't want that to happen. I'm not a Chiefs fan. I'm not hoping for 3 Super Bowl wins from the same team in a row. I'm just warning you, while you're complaining about everything that they're doing, they're too busy winning. So keep that in mind. Next tier, these are our true Super Bowl favorites. True Super Bowl favorites. This tier, to me, Super Bowl favorites, is going to start with the Vikings at 4. Look, I said it from the start of this video, and if you're watching the clips of this, I said it with the earlier teams. One of the most undervalued and underappreciated things in the NFL is a coaching staff. The Vikings shut everyone else up who have these really good rosters, or not even really good rosters, just fine rosters, maybe developmental rosters. Some of those teams at the bottom of your power rankings or whatever, they make them all look stupid because they didn't focus on the most important thing, which was getting a coaching staff, getting a head coach, an offensive coordinator, and a defensive coordinator. You can get, I can't tell you the name of the Vikings offensive coordinator. It might as well be Kevin O'Connell. Defensive coordinator is Brian Flores. So you get 2 really good coordinators on offense that can kind of complement each other, right? That is one of the most important things you can do as a franchise. Now for the Vikings, they have that. And then you look at the roster. They have a good roster. They have a talented roster for sure. Let's go to the offense. I want to talk about Sam Darnold for a little bit. This is what happens when you go from the Jets, is historically one of the worst run organizations on the history of the planet, and then you go to an actual run organization run by real men that know what they're doing, and not just a party of idiots. Sorry to just keep throwing shade at the Jets, but they drive me up a wall. I don't know how you can be a Jets fan. I don't want to crap on Jets fans. If you're a Jets fan, I'm not trying to direct all this hate towards you. I just could never be a Jets fan. I would have left that franchise. I'm not a bandwagon or anything. But there are points that a franchise gets to where it's okay to leave. I would have left this year. I would have left a while ago, but this year would have definitely drove the nail in the coffin. Back to the Vikings, though. Again, this is what happens when you leave a team like the Jets and get around a good coaching staff. Sam Darnold has totally flipped the script on his career. Now, what the Vikings do with him is kind of dependent on what the postseason looks like. If they go to the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl, you have to sign him again. The only way you don't re-sign Sam Darnold to either a contract extension, like a really big contract extension of some sorts, is if he takes a total crap in the bed in the playoffs. Just absolutely fumbles the bag in the playoffs. Week 1 or week 2 or something, he's the reason you lost. That's the only reason you don't. Other than that, he is going to get a contract extension. It will likely be from the Vikings. If not, it will be someone else that needs a quarterback that will pay him $40 to $50 million a year. That's the reality we're in. Sam Darnold isn't just a product of playing in a good system with really good players as well. He's also just playing really well himself. We forget Sam Darnold was a very talented prospect coming out of college, and here he is making really talented plays. He's had his ups and downs this year, for sure, but it's been a lot more ups and he's been the reason for a lot of wins. So he needs his respect. Look at this receiving corps. Justin Jefferson, best receiver in the league. Jordan Addison's truly emerged as a number 2 receiver. TJ Hawkinson's, he's been injured a lot of the season, but he's TJ Hawkinson. He's one of the best tight ends in the league. Offensive line's been great. The system that they play in, because Christian Darrisaw has been injured, so that's made it tough. But the offensive system that they play in can cover up for some injuries on the offensive line as well. Kind of like I was mentioning with the 49ers a bit. Now onto the defense. You get a good group of guys like this together. Really solid guys like Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman and Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Grenard. And these guys have been solid to good, few great moments in their career. And then you fill that defensive roster out with those kinds of guys, and then give Brian Flores that group. That's what's gone on with the Vikings here, and it's one of the most prolific defenses we've seen in a while. Started the year off a little bit stronger than they've been finishing, but it's still a fantastic defense. And it's still a defense that has very strongly carried this team, not carried, but has helped and contributed this team to making a very strong impact, I'm assuming, in the playoffs. The Vikings just do so many things the right way. Ideally, there's 100 Kevin O'Connells running around the NFL that can work with young quarterbacks, because that's the absolute dream, is to be a young quarterback that gets to work with Kevin O'Connell and get to be a part of the Vikings and everything right now. So how can you not like what the Vikings have done and how they've kind of, turned themselves around a good bit this season? And, the only real thing that's keeping them from being at the top here is we got to see Sam Darnold in the playoffs and see how he does. And I'm not here to doubt him at all. I was high on him going into the season. I didn't expect this, and I didn't expect this kind of success from the Vikings. But there's still a little bit of doubt left to be for the big moments in the playoffs with him. He's never experienced that, really. So that's what's keeping them at 4 and probably not higher. Regardless of that, though, there's just 3 other teams that are really good. And the next one we're going to talk about is the Lions. And the thing with the Lions, I got to get some water. The thing with the Lions is they've been my number 1 team for a good bit of the season now. The reason that they're number 3 now isn't because they lost to the Bills. They could have lost to the Bills, and I would have kept them at 1. It was a close game. The reason they're at 1 is the injuries, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure, the most injured team in the league right now. And it's going to be absolutely devastating if this turnaround and this team that's been playing better than literally everyone else majority of this season gets squashed in the playoffs week 1, or first game of the playoffs or second game of the playoffs because of injuries. It's going to be so devastating. And I really hope that doesn't happen. Now, I think they have the troops to avoid that. I think they have the coaching staff to avoid that. But it still scares me a bit. And you'd really like to see them get a few of these guys back before the postseason kicks in. Even if they lose the rest of the regular season games. That would be fine. They're going to need some health to come back. But here's the thing. Let's talk about the positives with them. Offensive line is, I'm going to say, the best in the league. It's with, between the Eagles and them, best in the league. I think you're kind of, you're cutting hairs at that point. They're really elite offensive lines. Running back room, let's talk about the healthy version of the Lions in some manner. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs has been... It's what a lot of teams are trying to achieve this year now. And it's been so lethal. It's been so dangerous having this 1-2 punch. And we all laughed, me included, laughed at the Lions for taking Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round at 12 to last year's draft. last year's, because this last season was Terry and Arnold, but the year before that was Jahmyr Gibbs. We all laughed at them for that. We owe Campbell and Brad Holmes a huge apology. He is electric. He is easily one of the best running backs in the league right now, and he contributes so much to this offense, even with David Montgomery and when David Montgomery is playing. And David Montgomery is a kick-ass running back, by the way. The complementary of having them both has been lethal as well, and the fact that they have an amazing offensive line. Jared Goff has completely turned his career around also. He made a strong MVP case for this season up until he threw 4 or 5 interceptions in that one game. I think that kind of dialed him back a good bit. If he didn't have a game like that, I think he's at least top 2 in MVP odds, which is tough, but I don't think he cares as much about that because he's back to playing like Jared Goff and back to playing really good, sound football. He can win a Super Bowl with this team. Onto the defense, D-line. Not going to include Aiden Hutchinson because he was out too early, but you get Liam McNeil in there. I don't know if he's going to be there for the postseason. I really hope so. Liam McNeil, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, Carlton Davis, Terrion Arnold's had his lumps, but he's been good for them still. Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell's been playing awesome. So much good about this defense. The story with the Lions, again, is going to come down with, are these injuries going to crush them or not? Can they face this adversity? What team in the league do you think faces adversity best? It's the Lions. I think they can handle it. It still worries me, but I think they can handle it. We're wrapping up pretty soon here. Got 2 teams left. The next team I have, this is the number 2 team, the Eagles here. At number 2 in the entirety of the NFL. The Eagles, story with them is Saquon Barkley. This is what we all hoped and dreamed we could see for Saquon Barkley at some point in his NFL career. Stick him behind a good offensive line with some other weapons and a quarterback and just watch the magic happen. We watched Saquon Barkley turn the narrative around running backs completely on its head this season. Along with, other players that I've been talking about, like Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery and Josh Jacobs and everything. But the one heading the charge is Saquon, okay? And we are seeing him in the perfect situation for him to succeed. But he's doing what he's supposed to with this team that he's on. He's producing, and he's being a great benefit and leading the charge for this offense. He is absolutely electric. I said in another video, he's probably one of the most athletic players this league has seen this decade. Most talented athletes is kind of what I'll say. It's so phenomenal watching him go to work with a team like this. Now, talking about the rest of the team, offensive line, like I said, one of the other best in the league. Jalen Hurts, I'm not incredibly high on as other people are. I've had some negative things to say about him. But one thing I do know about him is that if he has A.J. Brown and he has Devontae Smith and the offensive line's working and there's a run game, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having him at quarterback. So this team's scary, completely scary in offense. Dallas Goedert in there too. He's not playing quite as well as he was in the past, but still a really good tight end. On the defensive line's full of depth. Jalen Carter's a beast. Jordan Davis. Secondary. What was their biggest issue last year? Cornerback, right? What did they address in the draft? Cornerback. What's their best thing on defense now? It's their cornerback room. Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell are why they're as good as they are. I mean, it's those two and Saquon Barkley. Why they were able to flip the script from last season. So you have that, and Just an overall really polished roster. Here's where I get a little bit down on the Eagles. I still don't believe in Nick Sirianni. I think the Eagles are winning despite Nick Sirianni. I don't think he's necessarily improving the team a whole bunch. I think this roster is one. I just talked about the Vikings and how important a coaching staff is. First of all, the coordinators on the Eagles right now, very good. Very good. The other thing is this roster is so good and so talented, they can play above what Nick Sirianni has to offer. Because other than that, there's not a lot of weaknesses on this Eagles team. Nick Sirianni is the weakness on this team. And it's going to be some of his game management that has me worried at times. Some of his, whatever decisions he makes late in the game in the postseason that would have me a bit worried. But that's about it. On to the number one team in the NFL right now. I have the Buffalo Bills. And the thing with the Buffalo Bills is, to me, this is the hot team. Not as much as it's the best roster and the best coach. They have way less injuries, so we'll do some comparison here against the other teams. When it comes to the Vikings, I think they're over them because they have the better quarterback. When it comes to the Lions, they're better than them because they're healthy. When it comes to the Eagles, they're better than them because basically everything I just said, and then also coach is better. Is the offensive line as good as the Eagles? No, the Bills' offensive line isn't. Is their defense as good as the Vikings? No, not really. Quarterback's better than anyone else on that list for sure. Josh Allen's playing like an MVP. He's playing like the number one quarterback in the league at this moment. Receiving core isn't as good, but that doesn't seem to matter, and it hasn't mattered this season because on paper the receiving core isn't good, but their system the system that they're using right now doesn't need 3 top 10 receivers to be a part of this league. They need a few solid guys like Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman to just do their job, and that's been good enough. Now, I was talking a little bit negative about this offense. I didn't mean it negatively. It was just a comparison to the other top 4 teams in the league. But you look at the offensive line, good offensive line for sure. Receiving core, including Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman. Really good, especially with the play style they have. Quarterback, like I said, best quarterback in the league at the moment. Move to the defense. The defense has been playing up. The defense has been playing better. Gregory Rousseau's been breaking out like crazy. Cornerback room's really broken out. Christian Benford has been fantastic. Teron Johnson's still playing really well. They still have a really solid defensive line on the interior as well. Linebacking core, Matt Milano. So the thing with the Bills, like I said at the start when talking about them, they are the hot ones right now. And they've been hot the whole season. But coming off a win against the Lions was a big deal for them. And listen, I mentioned the injuries and stuff. I know you can say the injuries were, maybe a piece of that win or whatever. I get it. But guess what? We're really close to the postseason, and I don't know how many more Lions players we're getting back healthy. So, as far as I know, they beat the postseason Lions. If they were to play the Eagles today, I think they could win. And I don't think there's a reason I have them at 1. I don't think it's that they have a chance. I think the Eagles are the ones that would need to have a chance against them. This is a really hot team that's really good right now. Josh Allen is playing better than I believe Jalen Hurts would in that matchup, which is another one of the main differences. We're going quarterback for quarterback here. I don't think there's another quarterback in the league playing better than Josh Allen. Woo! Okay. So that was like 5 hours of recording probably. Thank you for watching. If you watch this whole video, you're a saint. I doubt anyone did that. I'm going to be posting this into clips team by team, so you can just watch your team on YouTube. Thank you for watching.